What made you give up on a computer illiterate person who you were just trying to help? Oh, this quote comes from my dear mother. It's not turning on now because you've downloaded whatever that Firefox thing is. My aunt. I moved away a year ago to go work for a big IT company. She wants to keep me updated on local news from back home. Her process for giving me news articles from our local news website is mind-boggling. She first prints off a news article from a website to her office copier. She then takes the printout, puts it back on the office copier, scans it to PDF and then emails the PDF to herself, then forwards me said PDF. I tried to explain to her 3 or 4 times now how to copy a URL from her web browser, paste it into her email, and send that to me. But she insists that that's too complex and she'll never be able to figure out how to do that. My boss calls everything from our website to our printers database. We do in fact have a document database which we use, so every time she has an issue, I have no freaking idea what she's talking about. I can't connect to the database. It might mean she can't print. The database has crashed, where being hacked means that her computer is unplugged. There are similar people at my company who refer to everything as the server. Is the server down means their screen resolution is set to 800 by 600. Is the server up means I've somehow erased my hard drive. And could you put it on the server means why isn't the file magically appearing on my desktop? Reaching over my shoulder and pressing the power button while I'm midway through a registry edit and saying, "Do you think rebooting it will help?" How does one react to that without violence? Ever since you fixed that paper jam, my computer has been running slower. This is why I don't do computer support for my family and friends anymore. It's always, ever since you did X, my computer has been running slower. No, mother effer, ever since you downloaded Comet Cursor and Bonsai Buddy, your computer has been running slower. I'll ask them, show me exactly how you caused the problem to occur. And they'll answer, why can't you do it? You're the computer expert. It's maddening. Even when you try to explain why you need to know what they were doing at the time, they still take it as an accusation. What are you going to do because of it? Call the police? I really don't get the irrational fear of computers from some people. People will apparently choose to take any suggestion that they might have caused the problem as a personal attack as well, even when it's from someone that they need to give the information to in order to fix said problem. And this isn't even unique to computers. Is it possible that the human race are the ones who've missed a major software update somewhere along the line? They thought that if you get the destination address slightly wrong on an email, someone, like an electric postman I guess, will know what you mean. My mum had been giving out her email, adding, or something like that, at the end of it. There's a guy out there who's a devout Christian. I think I've gotten every single email intended for him for years. Personal stuff, calls to pro-life action, bank statements, his child's PlayStation Sony account, and lately, a lot of really crappy adult movie and dating sites. I think he might be going through a divorce. I think the most infuriating thing you can hear from one of these people is when you're on your way out, walking past the computer, and then, oh, by the way, while you're here. Recently, this happened. My IT manager said, the .com site is slow. The system admin said, is the entire thing slow or one of the web apps or what? Can you just spin up some VMs to make it faster? Our answer to every problem is now, just spin up some VMs. Users seem to latch onto phrases like that. I remember once when our internal CRM was playing up, I said, I need to restart Apache. And holy crap! After that, everyone in an office of about 20 people would tell me I need to restart Apache whenever something went wrong. Internet down? Restart Apache. Document missing? Restart Apache. Forgot your password? Restart Apache. So, here's how you can prevent this from happening in the future. Don't give me the technical mumbo-jumbo, just fix it. Oh, it doesn't work for me like it does for you, I'm just unlucky. That is never true. My mum shouted at me the other day because her camera wasn't connecting to the computer. I spent some time trying to help, at which point it became all my fault, but I couldn't find out why I wasn't recognizing it. I then decided to check the cable. Apparently, USB cables can fit into the top part of Ethernet ports. Who knew? Blaming an error on you when it happens months later and is completely unrelated to any work you did, especially if it's a hardware failure when you fixed software problems. Just imagine that with any other technical industry. Got a friend who's an electrician come to your house for free to install an outlet for free, and next year a light bulb on the other side of the house burns out, so you call him up and say it's probably his fault and guilt him into replacing it? That crap just doesn't fly. My mum said, "Some of the keys on my keyboard are sticking. Can you ask your boyfriend to reprogram it for me?" "No, Mum, that's not how it works. That sounds like a hardware problem." "You're not the computer engineer. Go and ask your boyfriend." Are the numbers also capitalized? Yes. Yeah, they are, sure. Yesterday, we usually have 2 computers in the business center for guests to use. Well, one is out of commission because it broke. The guests killed it. This lady comes to the desk and said she couldn't get it to work, and I frown and say, "Well, it's just a monitor, there isn't a computer actually attached." "But there's a monitor?" "Yeah, but unless you hook it up to a PC of your own, that monitor is not a PC." I must be the idiot because she started arguing about it from the beginning. Not really a computer problem, but just as enraging. I used to do internal systems support for Circuit City. If it plugged in and wasn't merchandise, I fixed it. I got an emergency call one afternoon for a store 200 miles or 3.5 hours drive away. Their direct TV display was down and the district manager was insisting somebody come to fix it ASAP. So I drop what I'm doing, drive my butt 200 miles to get to the fricking store, only to find that the 2 power strips at the bottom of the display that everything was powered from were plugged into each other instead of into an actual working outlet. I was frickin' livid. Got a new laptop 2 weeks ago. I installed Firefox on it. My dad said, "What's this?" "Oh, it's Firefox, Dad. It's a different web browser." "I don't want you installing things that aren't normal to your new laptop. It could contain viruses." I once spent 20 minutes correctly aligning the pins on a VGA connector that a client's child had smashed repeatedly onto the video connector, incorrectly resulting in pins being bent and twisted like a plate of spaghetti. If I hadn't, she would have needed a new monitor as it was a CRT and it ran directly into the unit, as opposed to today's setups. So after I do this and get her computer to a screen, she begins to complain to me about how I wasted 20 minutes of time intentionally to bill her more. I said, "Good day," like I was British royalty, and I moseyed on to my next call. "Hackers use Notepad," said my IT director right after removing the Start menu shortcut to Notepad from everyone's computer, but he did leave the executable. I'd like to let it sink in that this was uttered by the Director of Information Technology at a company. I'm an idiot nobody with an arts degree, and it sounds like I'd be better at the job than him if I just rocked up, played Minesweeper all day, and let my personnel do their jobs. At least I have the sense to know when I don't know what I'm doing. The end user said, "I had a Word document on my C drive that I'd been working on for the past week. I accidentally deleted it and emptied the recycle bin. I need the file for a meeting I have in 20 minutes. Get it back for me." "I'm sorry, but there's really no way for us to recover that file." "But I thought you said that the servers were backed up nightly. Go to one of the backups and get it back." "Well, that's true, but you didn't save it to the server, you saved it locally." "Well, yeah, I needed it on the C drive in case I needed to work from home." "But you have a desktop PC, not a laptop. How do you work on it from home?" "What do you mean, how? I email it to myself, work on it on my home computer, and then email it back." I take a big breath inwards and say as professionally and calmly as I can, "And you did this last night?" "Yes." At this point I'm very happy because I realize that I can help the person after all. "Great! Then there should be a copy of the file in your inbox. You can just re-download the attachment you sent yourself last night." "You mean I have to do it myself? Fine. God forbid you IT guys actually do anything useful. I don't know why we even pay you." Slams the phone down to hang up. I helped an old man working on a laptop over the phone. He was working on an oil pipeline near Dead Horse, Alaska. He didn't know where the Start menu was, and I asked him to go to the bottom left on his desktop, to which he responded, "I told you I have a goddamn laptop, not a desktop." Okay. Now again, I just want you to type A as in apple. K as in apple? Okay, where are your files located? In Word. Okay, but where are they? In Word. But what file are they in? In my documents? No, they're in Word, damn it. Back in the day, there were monitors that you could switch from color to green only, so you could use them as a text-only terminal or as a regular monitor. A fairly common complaint was, My monitor is all green, and it was just a button you press on the side of the monitor to toggle it back. I got a request to fix this one day. I cruise over and press the offending button and the monitor switches back to color. How did you do that? I proudly show her the secret button, placed conveniently near the power switch on the side of the machine. In every other instance of this problem, at this point the user would say, "Oh, thank you," and I'd walk away satisfied with another successful ticket closure. But not this time. "Why is that there?" they ask. I explain it's in case the monitor is used on a text-only terminal. Plain green letters are easier to read. I don't understand. I just want to know why it happened. I point out that the button is right near the power button, and she probably pressed it accidentally when she turned the monitor on or off. "I didn't press any button. You need to fix it." "Okay, really, I don't care. Your monitor is color again, and I just wanted to get out of there." So I started edging away. "I want to understand what happened so it will never happen again." "Don't press that button again." Oh, she didn't like that. I got the death glare all the way down the hall and a complaint from her to my manager. We both made fun of her behind her back for a very long time after that. Pro tip, it's okay for you if you do something that makes the computer act funny and you have to ask for help to fix it. You don't need to find a way to blame it on someone or something else, and we're not going to judge you for it unless you act like a butthead about it. Believe me, whatever stupid thing you've done, we've seen stupider. In short, don't press that effing button and act like it wasn't your fault. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My parents are bad in their own respective ways. I'm not sure which I prefer helping. My mum knows very little but will actually do exactly what I tell her to do, which is good but can take a while. Dad knows a little bit more, and as such thinks he knows way more than he really does. This leads to him not listening sometimes. He'll say, "I need to put some files on my thumb drive." "Okay, Dad, you remember how we did that last time?" "No." "Okay then, what files?" "Pictures." "Okay, open your pictures folder, highlight the ones you want, and press Ctrl-C. Long pause ensues. "Are you doing that, Dad?" "No, I'm in the control panel." "Who the frick told you to go to the control panel?" "I thought it might help." And to clarify, because I keep getting this question, the shortcuts don't confuse him. He uses them in Word all the time, and he didn't hear Control and think he should go to the control panel. He went there because he thought it might help. He'll ask me for help, then immediately disregard it and do his own thing that won't help at all. I hear, regardless of symptoms, "I have a virus." Hey, I know you folks at Best Buy are always trying to confuse people like me. I don't want to hear any bullcrap, just show me where the disks of internet are. Disks of… Ma'am, I don't understand. Do you already have a provider or… Cut the bullcrap, just show me where I can get a disk of internet. In the aisle next to the car stereos, ma'am. Circa 2006. Now listen, it's not a problem with my computer, it's that the screen keeps turning blue. I was running a check disk on a PC for someone who was out on vacation. I stepped out for a few minutes to work on another nearby PC. I come back to the office and some lady was sitting in the chair trying to use the computer. I don't know who this lady was, but she told me, "There were a lot of words and stuff on the screen, so I turned the computer off." In the middle of a check disk. On a computer that wasn't hers. Look people, I know, listen. Things that we don't understand can be scary and intimidating to some of us. But with that in mind, maybe when you see something alien from the great beyond in the email machines that these young people are always using, you shouldn't just run up to them and shove the metaphorical stake through the heart of the foreign entity. Just a thought. About 10 years ago, I briefly worked at a non-profit that used Dreamweaver for their massive website. I was hired to clean up and reorganize the site, which was slow and not well organized. Since the rank and file had been using the WYSIWYG interface for years, the content was filled with all sorts of depreciated or incomplete and inappropriate elements like Blink. So I'd bring individual documents into my favorite text editor, use regular expressions to strip out all of the HTML, and then reformat the content with a well-validated HTML that could be easily dropped back into the templates and to now work with the new CSS. Not parsing, merely removing. The code that was there wasn't worth parsing. So, my boss was a VP, laterally moved from a non-technical department to oversee the web development team. She could barely use her computer to surf the web, let alone code anything. She just knew Dreamweaver was our development tool and tried to use buzzwords to justify her micromanagement style. Technical people were not fooled, and non-technical people thought that she was brilliant and all techie. So she came into my office one day and rather obviously worked her way behind my desk to see what I was doing. If we had done the same, we would have seen her instant messaging her friends all day, I bet. I ignored her since it was obvious she was checking up on the new girl. With the piles of content I'd plowed my way through, I had nothing to hide and a lot to be proud of. However, upon seeing the text editor up with content she recognized, she literally shrieked, "This is gobbledygook, it's not Dreamweaver, the entire web is written in Dreamweaver. Everyone knows that. Why did we hire you?" Even though I'd been there less than a month, that was the day I started looking for a new job. Every problem that ever arises on a person's computer is a result of whatever you previously did, regardless of time frame or action. You downloaded Firefox? Well, that's clearly what caused that catastrophic hard drive failure. My uncle used to call any mild tampering, such as removing one of the 200 search bars, breaking, as he was used to it like that. I say, turn the computer off by pressing and holding the power button. There was 20 seconds of silence on the other end of the line. Did it turn off yet? No, I can still hear it running. The guy was pressing and holding his LCD power button, not the one on the PC. Support is hard over the phone unless you're extremely specific, and then they just think you're being a jerk. So I've just stopped helping friends altogether because it feels like having the nebulous qualifier "good at computers" entitles any and all acquaintances to treat you like slave labor tech support. And that is bullcrap because you can't do that with any other skill set. If you've got a friend who's got some culinary talent, you never hear someone say something to them like, "Hey dude, I'm really craving a southwestern omelet with a spice honey glaze, and I was kinda hoping you could help me out." Huh? Google it. Google what? Oh, Google the recipe. Why would I try to seek out step-by-step instructions and try to solve my own problems? That sounds like it involves work and reading. Come on, do it for me. You're so good at cooking. I mean, I'm not going to compensate you in any way, but you're so good at cooking, it'll be fun. Granted, I'm going to eat the entire frickin' omelet, so there'll be no tangible benefit for you, but it'll still be fun. Well, no, of course it doesn't sound like fun to me. I'm not a frickin' idiot, but I bet it'd be fun for you. Oh, and also, couple of things. I'm gonna hover over your shoulder the entire time and complain about how long it's taking every 5 minutes or so. On top of that, you'll probably get a call 2 weeks later like, "Hey man, what's up? Oh, I'm fine. I just got done eating a deep fat fried pepper stuffed with bacon and sauteed in Tabasco. Anyway, for whatever reason, I feel like I'm gonna crap my pants any second, and I'm pretty sure it's because of that omelet you made me 2 weeks ago that gave me indigestion. You wanna come over and grill me a steak to make it up for me?" "Where's all my stuff?" she said after reloading her operating system and having 1. Explained at length how everything would be gone after she did that, 2. Offered her a data transfer, 3. Read her the wipe and reload paperwork out loud, and 4. Had her sign the papers that said everything will be gone. Finally, we told her that her computer would only have the things on it that it had when it was brand new. "I didn't think you meant everything would be gone, though." Doing tech support at an ISP, the person said, "My computer won't turn on. Your internet is broken." I asked them to check the back of the computer to see if the plug was in, and they replied, "I can't see the back of the computer. It's dark in here." I said, "Well, turn on the light then." "Well, the power's out." Computer illiterate people think everything is a virus, almost like how I think everything in the sky is a UFO. "Is it done yet?" After explaining exactly what the problem is and then having the completely computer illiterate person say, "Oh, I don't think that's it. That can't possibly be the problem," usually followed by a broken description of something their brother's, cousin's, sister's, daughter's, boyfriend's former roommate, who's also a computer genius beyond your skills, said about Fruity Loops that has absolutely nothing to do with the issue. My mum and sister had managed to make my mum's computer so slow with retarded bullcrap that she went out and bought a new computer. The infuriating thing is that when she went about installing the same crap on the new computer, I could have cried. When that too became slow, my mum finally let me sort it out and she agreed it was better, but I had to change the Firefox for an IE icon and rename it Internet. I also had to ban her from installing idiotic software, which she sort of listened to. So the new computer does okay. She recently got an iPad and has filled it with all the crappy apps she can find. There's no helping that woman. Oh, they can't help it. I'm willing to bet my pathetic, crappy fortune on her never using the vast majority of those apps more than the one time she's prompted to install them. My inspiration for that idea? My dear sweet mother. just the general misconception that working in IT or web development is not real work. I mean, I'm obviously not working hard, right? All I do is sit at a computer. Shut up. I was working with computers before you were even born. I probably know more about them than you ever will, said my dad, who hasn't owned a computer for 20 years and doesn't even know how to use Google. Talking to my mum, it won't do anything. Is it on? Yes. How can you tell? The red light is on. Okay. Hit the button right above the little red light. Now it's green. Is it sick? Is this a virus? After my mum asks for help with something I've never problem-solved before and I start looking for a solution, she asks me to show her what I'm doing. When I say wait and let me figure it out first, she says, well, I can't learn if you don't show me. Can you learn with a pitchfork in your skull, woman? How about those people who are just dangerous around a PC? I had a guy at my office take home a work laptop. He brings it back and says it won't boot. I try and it turns out there's no IS. I ask what happened and he says it was slow, so he put a disk in and chose to reformat. This guy was so bad, he was completely computer illiterate, but for some reason believed he knew more than me. So dangerous. My mother, I have a computer science degree. Well, then why the frick are you asking me to help you figure out how to get on IRC? You should already know. I'm your mother, don't talk back to me. Facepalm. I don't want you to show me what I did wrong, just fix it. People who work at remote places, like forest officers, oil rig workers. What creepy things have you noticed while at work? I do a lot of stream work, so I spend time out in pretty rural areas walking streams and rivers. Once my coworker and I were working in a more urban environment and came across what we initially thought was a body, which of course triggered the "oh god" from us, but it ended up being a firefighter's dummy that had fallen down a hill. We felt pretty dumb. Other notable things include a small grave in the middle of nowhere for someone's dog, which was kinda sad, and a stuffed rabbit with shotty shells placed where its eyes should be, a mannequin very purposefully placed in a chair in the middle of the wood, and lots of little random altars. I also did work in Myrtle Beach, which was a hellhole, and accidentally walked into an inhabited homeless camp. I was peering into a stormwater grate when I looked up and saw a homeless person standing in his shelter, staring at us and saying nothing. I felt like I was trespassing, so we quietly left. I worked at a public forest. One day we had someone report a dead animal on the side of one of our trails. A few of us from the front desk hiked out to see what it was. It looked like a giant piece of liver, maybe? Just a pile of smooth red meat. No blood around. And it was wrapped up in a t-shirt with some coins scattered around it. We called our rangers to go check it out, and one of them was pretty sure it was placenta. The weird part is, you have to check in through a front desk, so someone either snuck a placenta or liver in, or gave live birth or removed an organ on our trails. We never got an answer on what that pile of meat was, how it got there, or why. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis off the coast of Scotland. I wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormally creepy, but it can be a very unsettling and weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can't see the walkways 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over the grating, you can't see the sea below your feet. It's only about 60 meters down from deck to sea, but you can hear it, all of it muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving and swaying on the high winds and rough seas, even though it's a fixed-leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was my first ever night shift, and I found it particularly unsettling, as you got the background noise of the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there's about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller headcounts. Usually, once a trip, I'm hit by this awareness that you're just very isolated and in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land, so if things go wrong, it can escalate very quickly. Yeah, I've thought about a lot of these sorts of jobs where you get paid a lot more because of the remoteness, loneliness, and the fact that in the very unlikely event of an emergency, you're probably screwed. Still, I have the first two already, so maybe a little danger would spice up my life. My college was located away from major cities, and the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Sock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on an extended backpacking trip, a more than 50-mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I'm an Eagle Scout who spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before, you get used to the minor spooky things happening: coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and being in Pennsylvania, where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people or people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off the trail, where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out at about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It's the fall semester, so the leaves are on the ground, and the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time where I'd hear my friend turn over in his sleep. And then I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100 meters away. I checked my watch. It was 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We were 20 miles in. I slowly got out of my sleeping bag, unzipped my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, and then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path. They're walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, an impossibility for the long hike they're a third of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring woodcutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it's my only way of defending myself, I'm more disheveled than I've ever been, especially knowing that a knife is barely a defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what feels like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they're doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we had only then a few extra Mountain House MRE-style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following: "We don't use lights, we know where the trail is, and it's better to hike late at night." Unnerved at this point, my friend asks them to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we don't. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts, making sure that they didn't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got some real shut-eye. By the afternoon when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. I've never had something as weird or spooky as that happen in the woods, and I hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I haven't been back to the Loyal Sock Trail. I have a bunch of friends that love to do mushrooms. This definitely sounds like something they'd do. I used to be a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple of times a week I had to go to a middle school and clean their hallway floors and gymnasium with a Zamboni-type vehicle that mopped and scrubbed the floor. When I was there, I had the whole school to myself. I used to get finished quickly and go to the library and read while eating my dinner. Well, one morning after being there, I got a call from school security and they wanted me to come in. When I got there, I saw a police car too. Uh-oh, I think. They asked me a few questions like, "Did you notice anything out of the ordinary or strange while you were here last night?" No, I hadn't. I usually have my headphones in. Security then shows me camera footage of someone breaking into one of the classrooms while I was riding the Zamboni not far away. I was there for another 2 hours. Nothing was stolen, but the worst part was they didn't have footage of the person leaving. They didn't go out the way they came in, and police had to sweep the entire school. Never did find out what happened with that one. I think someone needs to go check up on the person who wrote this comment because as far as I'm concerned, there's a non-zero chance he's being haunted by a phantom and may have been cursed or something in his subsequent shifts at the school. I used to work on a ship and we're usually gone 3 to 10 months at a time. I work night shifts, so this meant I could sleep in the sleeping quarters during daytime with either just me or a handful of other crew members, where usually there'd be 20 to 30 of us in there. It wasn't so bad. Actually, I really liked it because it's a lot more peaceful sleeping during the day. You don't hear anyone else snoring or someone's footsteps because they get up in the night to pee or anything like that. All you can hear is the light creak of the walls and the floors of the ship, and all you can feel is the sway of it on the ocean. A bit haunting and creepy if you really think about it, but I like it. All of that ended when there was a short period of time where there were only 2 of us sleeping in the room. At least that's what I thought. I started hearing light taps across the room. At first they were light taps, then it would get a bit faster, and sometimes a bit louder. I'd ignore it if it wasn't so utterly annoying. I looked at where the other guy was sleeping and he seems to be fast asleep, accompanied by his light snoring. Second day, there it goes again. I tried to follow the sound, but for some reason it bounced around the room like an echo. Eventually, it comes to an abrupt halt, so I tried to sleep it off. During the night shift, I tried to ask the other guy if he had heard it, but he said he was too tired to even notice. I guess I'm alone in this pursuit. On the third day, I take my pursuit one step further by not sleeping right away. I'd be fully awake when it started, so I'll have a better chance of discovering the source. And there it goes again. This time I go from one empty rack to the next, until finally it was loud as heck, tapping in progress. My heart was thumping like a jackhammer. I pulled the curtain to one side. There lay the biggest dude I've seen on the ship, holding his manhood mid-stroke. You have no idea the speech I'd prepared for this guy in my head for keeping me up for several days, but at that exact moment I had no idea what to say. Of course, I gave out a small yelp, which didn't help the situation. I never thought I'd be locking eyes with another guy while he's gripping his eggplant while I begin this honorable pursuit. With the current situation, I mustered my best attempt at displaying my irritation. It somehow came out as an apology, followed by, "I keep hearing tapping noises." He hadn't said anything yet, but at that exact moment I realized his elbow, which belonged to the working arm, was resting right on the wall, probably banging on it over and over and over. I didn't wait for a reply. I nodded my head, kind of rolled my eyes, and walked away. It will never be easy trying to avoid a big guy like him every day in the same sleeping quarters. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. On our drill ship that was built in China, we noticed on the blueprints that there was a room. We went to look at it and couldn't find an entrance, but the spacing was obvious that there was an extra room. It might not sound so creepy unless you've been in these shipyards where 2 things are known to happen. Stowaways, although I doubt that was the case, but also hundreds of workers at any given time just following orders blindly. So we confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, yet not a single weld on the outside. There's only one way this could have happened, and I'm sure you're starting to get it now. They must have welded from the inside for this room and then realized they had no way out upon completion if the gases hadn't killed them first. It's extremely heavy around that room. People say they hear things. I definitely have. This isn't some old ship either. I rode this ship from China to Amsterdam after completion, and then the maiden voyage to America. I guess it happens quick. So that's where the monster that will eventually break out and lead to a really great horror event aboard the ship is being kept. I can't wait to find out what it is, although I do hope that the Netflix movie holds up to the real events. When I was 15 years old, I was doing my 4 a.m. newspaper delivery round on my bicycle. I was driving into the garden of this one subscriber where I saw 2 guys with flashlights looking through the windows of the house. I was kind of in shock and just said, "Good morning, guys." They were just as much in shock, and an awkward silence followed. I tried to break the silence by asking if I could pass them to deliver the newspaper through the door, and one of the guys said the person living in that house did something to his family, and they took it as an opportunity to get away in their car that was still running. When they were gone, I rang the doorbell at the house to tell them what had happened, and they should keep an eye out. This is kind of how you end up like that kid in Breaking Bad. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I was fueling up the side boom. I was all by myself at this point because I was tired of listening to the laborers whine about the cold, so I told them I'd take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade, but a giant metal boom on the side that we used to raise and lower the pipe. It was February, so pitch black. I keep hearing some weird sound. I can't quite hear it because the pump is too loud. I search around a couple of times and see nothing. I get in the truck and take off and drive past the front of the side boom to see a cougar sitting on top of a pile of dirt 15 feet away. The damn thing was just watching me there and probably could have ended me without even realizing it. I've never seen a cougar in the wild before, and it's hard to understand just how big they are and how powerful until you get up close to one. That thing leapt off the 6-foot pile and probably didn't touch the ground for 15 to 20 feet. It's terrifying to think something so big and powerful could just be sitting there, deciding if they want to make you dinner. I'm not sure if this counts, but I'm a teacher at an urban public school and was at work late grading and packing for the next day. Time had kind of flown by, and before I knew it, it was 7 p.m. I started packing up to leave in a building that is, in theory, locked and empty besides me, when our Alice alarm goes off, indicating an armed intruder in the building. I am 1. Alone, 2. Young, and 3. Freaked as hell because I am absolutely not ready to fight a weapon-toting madman over my lesson plans. I book it out of the school and dive into my car, hearing the alarm blaring the entire time. I peel out of the parking lot and can see in my rear view the alarm lights still flashing and debate never going back, because screw that. Turns out they were doing routine maintenance and didn't send out an email to the teachers. My mum used to live in a small town in the Cascade Mountains and worked as a forest ranger. The creepiest thing that happened was when the oldest male ranger kept hitting on her and trying to get her to come home with him. Not very out of the ordinary, but many years later, after she'd left the town, she found out he'd been convicted of manslaughter and had killed a young female ranger right before she got hired. She probably would have been his next target. I worked as the county historic preservationist in southern Appalachia, working on the buildings and properties the county owned. One of the benefits included with my job was living on site at one of the historic properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion built in the 1810s, and I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods, so to deter trespassing and vandalism, the county had built an 8-foot-tall fence around the entire 5-acre parcel and put barbed wire on top of the fence. I mention all of this just to show it was basically impossible for anyone or anything to jump or climb over the fencing and onto the property. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to my entrance gate, let myself in, locked it behind me, and then drove the 100 yards down the gravel road to my house. There were no lights on the property, so I could only see by my headlights. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and parked it, my lights shone on a thing that I still have a hard time describing effectively. It was the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and long shaggy hair. Almost like a taller maned wolf, if you've ever seen pictures of one of those. That alone shook me, as there's no way something of that size should have been able to get through or over my fencing. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look at what the heck that thing was, and as I opened the door and got out, the thing took off running away. Not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up, stand at full height on its back legs, and sprint away. I absolutely freaked out at that point. I grabbed my mag light and my shotty from inside and tried to find the thing again. There was no trace, no tracks or anything. I have no idea how it got in or out of my property. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on my couch with my shotty, watching the front door, hoping that whatever I saw didn't come back and burst in. I can't explain what the heck I saw that night, but it still raises hair on my neck every time I think about it. And that would be the story of how I quit that job, because I think if you stick around, your only career advancement is going to be mauled corpse found by the protagonist later with the exposition diary warning them to run. I think I'll wait for a better part, thank you. My oldest brother used to work the overnight sprinklers on a golf course. He took me out one time just for fun, and as we were driving uphill on a fairway, a figure of a lady appeared in the headlights at the top of the hill. My brother steered a little to the left of her and kept driving right on by. I stared right into her eyes as we drove past, and she stared back. Her eyes glowed like a cat in the night. As soon as we were out of voice range, I asked my brother, "Who the hell was that?" He calmly responded, "Oh yeah, she lives on the golf course and likes to terrorize the workers from time to time. I usually see her out here once a week." Alright, cool. When I was a kid living in Queensland, Australia, I used to bush bash, meaning walk off the beaten track through thick scrub. I knew the national park my house backed onto like the back of my hand. I knew from the topography where I was at all times. Both of my parents were ex-military and had a sort of hands-off approach, trusting me even as young as 12 to venture off on my own into the wilderness. So I could just pack a lunch, and my sister and neighborhood friend would come with. We'd head off early in the morning, returning just before sunset, usually. Once, when I, the eldest, was about 14, we had been following creek beds and bashing over heavily forested hills towards an area I'd never been. We came down a hill, through a gully full of ferns, and followed a dry creek bed for another hour. The sides of the creek became steep and rocky. Before long, we were passing through a gorge. As we emerged from the gorge, we noticed what looked like a dwelling. Being idiot kids, we wanted to see what was up. It looked abandoned at first, but as we got closer, we saw that tarps had been affixed to a ramshackle structure. Chicken wire surrounded what looked like a pen just outside. As my eyes traveled across it, I suddenly caught another pair of eyes looking directly back at me. A Rottweiler. We started slowly edging back away from the property, but it was too late. The dog started going nuts, and worried that it was coming after us, or at least alerting the person living in the hut, we bolted. I went back to the area a few times, but not too close to the abode itself, and found discarded bones from small game and other bits and pieces, spent 22 casings and a few other things. As an adult and knowing the area, it's very likely we stumbled across a homeless person camping out or a crystal lab, as the area, as I'd find out as an adult, was absolutely riddled with crystal labs. Some friends and I were fishing a small pond just after dark for catfish. We started to hear sounds coming off the water like someone was throwing softball-sized rocks, but they were coming from all over the pond. We thought someone was messing with us and we called out a few times for them to stop, but we eventually got freaked out and left. Cut to a few years later, I'm fishing a different pond and hear the same sound. Turns out it was a beaver slapping its tail on the water to drive me from its territory. When beavers become problems in rivers, they relocate them to ponds in town. I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they have some oil rigs. This rig wasn't being used, from what we knew, so we'd get pretty close to it to fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was some crap, but the explanation was the wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. Well, that's what we were told, but it totally creeped us the F out. I work as a polar bear guard, as in I escort people across tundra and mountains and protect them from polar bears. I once saw a snowman totem with reindeer antlers coming out of his head. It was deformed, full of bullet holes, and rather creepy. I spent a summer in Wyoming going to BLM land and lots of other remote locations, collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. Heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deer snorting, and what sounded like owls fighting. Woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of the job, until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going overland on no road and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at 100 yards away, got back in the truck, and turned around. This was after dark, and the shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush, and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office and told them I was taking a weapon when we went back out. I didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. What's the wildest, so where are they now, revelation about someone from your past? I googled my first grade crush and discovered a long list of arrests and his untimely death a few months ago. This was written in 2012. The first girl I ever had a big crush on in 6th or 7th grade believes that December 21st really is the end of the world. Last I checked, she had moved to Brazil, bought a house, a used Porsche, and racked up 30 to 40 grand in credit card debt. She hasn't worked a day in just over a year. December 22nd is going to be a rough day for a lot of people. Went to middle school with this really cute girl, but she had some emotional problems. She'd cry a lot and always get into trouble. 20 years later, I get a hold of her after my divorce because I don't know why. She's beaten cancer and is very well adjusted. We're dating now. Couldn't be happier. My dad looked up someone he used to be good friends with when he was younger. Turns out he's the creator of a game called Club Penguin, and he sold that game to Disney and got around $100 million. My dad's neighbor and childhood friend went ape on his entire family with a hatchet. A friend who everyone thought was an idiot is now a millionaire. I'm really happy for him. I never thought he was an idiot.
You can still be an idiot and be a millionaire, by the way.
Some guy I went to school with did a surfing trip around the world, sold his stuff and settled down on some island halfway around the world, I can't remember the name of where. He became intimate with one of the natives, lived on a beach, and sold dream catchers to tourists. Go figure. A year or two back, I googled my best friend from 2nd and 3rd grade, someone I hadn't seen in about 30 years, and my last memory of whom was us playing with our Han Solo and Boba Fett action figures. He's an executive at Pixar. It was about then that my midlife crisis went into full swing. And you know what? Fair enough. When you have that to compare yourself to, a little bit of ruminating and future panicking is fair enough. Luckily for me, my friends are all just as big a group of losers as I am. There was a guy that I wrestled in high school when he was a freshman who ended up being the 3-time state champion. Everyone said he could wrestle at any college in the nation. I googled his name a couple of years ago and found out he was in prison for committing the unspeakable act against his best friend's mother while he was intoxicated. I bumped into someone that I knew from high school who'd always been a bit of an aloof jerk, but I didn't have much contact with him. I didn't recognize him initially because he acted very spaced out and had some serious facial scarring going on. I found out from another friend that since I'd last seen him, he'd dropped out of university, moved to Paris, where he'd taken quite a heroic amount of substances, and taken over someone else's religion/cult. He tried to convince his parishioners that they could all fly, and demonstrated this from a window on the 2nd floor. Hence the facial scarring. Whenever I feel like an underachiever compared to other schoolmates, I think of this guy. But to be fair, he was the leader of a cult. High school friend who graduated in 2010 with a 1-year-old child, waiting for her boyfriend to be released from prison so they could get married. He was convicted for doing the unspeakable act on another girl. One of my best friends in high school is now in the biggest rock band in my country. Every time I see him on TV in his slick rock outfits, I see the 16-year-old him, ponytail in his neck, old woolen sweater to his knees and army boots. I texted him yesterday when he played a live show on TV. I got a text back about 1 minute after they'd finished. It's very surreal. This one kid I knew in high school always seemed like he was a few cans shy of a 6-pack. Sweet guy, but he always acted like he had been hitting the wacky tobacco a bit hard, and in general he seemed a bit inane. Fast forward to now, I friended him on Facebook and it turns out he's a local newscaster with a journalism degree and competes in professional ballroom dancing. He constantly posts really smart, witty things, and in general has his life together, way more than I would have expected. Chatting with him, I learned that he never really felt like he had any need to be himself in high school because people were so shallow anyway. So he played a monkey-like character, and at home practiced his ballroom dancing, wrote articles for online publications under a pseudonym, and, I can only assume, sat around listening to classical music, wearing a top hat and monocle, and sipping scotch like a sir. You just never really know people. Oh god, I have a list. 2 of my high school classmates became Olympic gymnasts. 1 high school crush had a nervous breakdown and brandished a knife at a police officer, who shot her. She survived and eventually opened a massage parlor in Vegas. A high school classmate, who I always thought was a bit of a jerk, became a police officer. He's currently in prison for participating in a drive-by shooting. And a childhood friend moved away and we lost touch. He became an actor playing Bulk on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I found out a few months ago my brother's friend in middle school I used to play GoldenEye with in my basement founded this little website called Reddit, Alexis Ohanian. I went to check up on my ex. We weren't very serious and it ended amicably, but didn't keep in touch, partly due to me moving across the ocean. I went to look her up earlier this year and found out she died in a car crash because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Weird feeling, but I feel worse for her daughter who now has to grow up without a mother. I recently found my best friend from 2nd grade on Facebook and discovered she's now a very proud exotic dancer. This is fine and all, but what was shocking is that when we were kids, I was the overtly weird and flirty one. She was so innocent that this discovery was kind of jarring. I've been debating whether or not to just show up at the club, buy a lap dance, and make it awkward. A very nice kid I went to middle school with took a bunch of substances and then beat 2 homeless people to death with his bare hands. He did this when he was 16. Oof. I used to know this girl growing up. Her parents knew my parents, so even though she was a few years younger, we spent a lot of time together. She was tall and lanky, super awkward and shy. 15 years later, my parents tell me she won some kind of modeling competition, married an older guy in the industry that she met on the show, which was Vegas Wedding with Elvis, and moved to California. Apparently, he's got serious money, so she doesn't work, but he flies her friends over from Sweden regularly so she doesn't get bored or lonely. There's this 30-year age gap, but apparently it's true love and they're both very happy. Not as crazy as some stories here, but I had a friend during my teenage years that I nearly hung out with on the daily. We always hung around in skate parks and did a lot of green herb together and had a good time. She was a good friend, but moved away at 17. I lost contact with her, which is partially my fault, but that's another story. Contacted her about 2 years ago, asking if she wanted to hang out and smoke a bit, like in the old days. I got a response and we met and started smoking some green herb. She looked me in the eyes and told me, "I should tell you, I am a cop nowadays." It was kind of strange to see my old friend that was into the punk scene and generally didn't like cops too much, being a cop. My secret crush from middle school grew up and became Pink. Dear Pink, well done, Alicia. This is why I kept it secret. I totally knew you outclassed me. Yeah, I reckon you should have shot your shot back then. What's the worst that could happen? They write a song about what a lame, limp, poorly endowed boyfriend you were, and just have your name be the title of the song. Oh, actually, maybe you did the best thing. I'm a bit late to the game, but this girl I went to school with ended up in LA making adult movies. The twist is that she's using my real name as her adult film star name. My name is really not that common, and while we were friends in school, she'd told me a few times that she really liked my name. It's very strange to Google her and see her mid-deed amidst a gaggle of strangers with my name. She and I went out a few times in high school, but nothing came of it. I ran into her years later and talked briefly, exchanged contact info, and parted. I asked her out, but she kept putting it off, and eventually I stopped asking. Maybe I was never the kind of guy she was interested in and didn't know how to properly say no. So maybe she gave excuses, hoping that I'd get the hint. I looked her up sometime later and found out she had changed her last name. Not terribly uncommon when someone gets married. Oh, so she's got married. Well, good for her, I guess, I think. I'll just go out to check out her Facebook profile and yep, there's an album of honeymoon pictures. And oh, there's her wife. So that explains a lot. I found out my first grade guy crush is currently a woman. I've tried to look up my first love a number of times over the last few years, but for a long time she did a good job of keeping her info off the internet. Last year, however, I found some information I'd rather not have found. She went on an alcoholic bender, got kicked out of the Navy, I think, had a kid, and had been arrested at least twice for multiple counts of theft and being a working girl. I always wonder how things might have been different if I'd moved across country with her when she wanted me to 10 years ago. Sadly, she put me in a position where I just couldn't do that. 2 weeks' notice to leave my hometown without a plan or money just wasn't something I could do at that age. Wherever you are now, I hope your life is better than it seems from the outside looking in. One of my good friends in grade school was raised by extremely religious and uptight parents. We're talking the kind of parents who wouldn't let us play Final Fantasy because it had magic in it, and that was the work of the devil. He moved away in like 6th grade. I found him on MySpace back when that was the main social media thing. The guy is now about as flamboyantly gay as can possibly be. I'm sure his parents are thrilled. My best friend from 5th grade is in the new 90210 series and also voiced Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars cartoon. I grew up with a girl from elementary school to grade 11. We were never close, but we had a bunch of classes together. Decently connected with my family. Smart, beautiful, popular. Her mum was great too, used to clean our elementary school in the mornings. I haven't seen her in a few years, but I found out her mum had been going crazy, till the point where she walked up behind the girl and slit her throat. Nicked her carotid artery, but thankfully she made it. Caught her mum and she's being charged. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I visited New Zealand a while back, I stopped by a bookstore and picked up an old hardback copy of Lord Jim by Joseph E. Conrad, dated 1928, with a "To Lennox Douglas from J.E.C." on the first page. If you're not familiar with Lord Jim, the gist of the plot is as follows. A young man is crewing a ratty old transport ship when it has an accident and is expected to sink. The crew, including Jim, pile into the only lifeboat and escape. However, the boat doesn't sink and they're all put on trial and labeled cowards for life. Jim spends his years trying to be a good and brave man in the far corners of the world to atone. And he dies young in a blaze of glory, so to speak. Anyway, I googled Lennox Douglas. 13 to 14 years after receiving this book as a gift, he found himself serving as a crew member on a transport ship in a convoy trying to evacuate Allied troops from Greece. The Luftwaffe sank his ship. 2 destroyers stayed behind to help survivors of the wreck, and both of them were also sunk within hours. There were virtually no survivors. The lifeboats were all strafed and sunk as well. So I honestly don't know how to feel. I haven't figured out the moral yet. It's not just coincidence. It's not appropriate, it's just bizarre and unsettling and sad. Maybe a little toast for bravery. A friend of mine who got me started on my wild, substance-fueled, debaucherous life in my late teens, no regrets, I had a great time, one day decided he'd go to LA and become a rich and famous rock star. No internet back then, so we didn't stay in touch. I was fully expecting to see him on TV one day. He was that kind of guy. Hot, persistent, and ruthless. In the nicest way possible. But it never happened. When I went to visit my hometown last year, I met his sister. She told me he had been gone for about 5 years without ever contacting his family. Then he came back, nice and smiling but not answering any questions. Instead, he made a big fire in the garden, burned all of his belongings, and went on to become a monk in a monastery. I still wonder what happened there. I googled my Chinese ex-girlfriend and came up with hundreds of people who were not her. A couple of weeks ago, I got a spam text for e-cigs. It showed up like a real number, had my first name in the message, and was signed with Johnny, which caught me off guard. That was the name of one of my dealers and good friends from college that I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years. So I went to check his Facebook page, thinking maybe one of our mutual friends gave him my number and he was messing with me. Turns out he passed away in June. No idea what happened, but his page was flooded with condolences and memories and such. I cried when I saw a post from his dad about the funeral. We didn't exactly end on great terms, but he was a nice guy and was always there to cheer people up. Rest in peace, Johnny. My aunt gave up a child for adoption because of how young she was when he was born. 20 years later, we found out he became an NFL player for the Chargers. Well, I can't say I condemn anyone in this. It seems like he did well enough with the upbringing he got, even if he definitely doesn't have to thank her for dumping him. And if she was too young to raise a kid and had a good adoption system set up, great, as long as she doesn't go trying to grub any favors off him. I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, and I had the same best friends since 6th grade. One went MIA when we went to college. I still remember the last time I saw him. We were at my grandparents' cottage in Indiana. It was me, Mike, my freshman year roommate, my 2 other buddies, and my girlfriend. It was the day before we were all leaving, so we were going to take the pontoon out to the sandbar for a few hours. I asked Mike if he wanted to go, but he was sleeping, so he said no. The rest of us went out and were there for a few hours when here comes Mike heading for us on the Wave Runner. He pulls up to us and says, "Hey guys, I'm leaving," and turned around and headed up into the sunset on the Wave Runner. I tried calling or texting or going by his house and he was just never there or never answered. It's been 2.5 years since I've seen him. We're all seniors now. I found out this past summer he's studying nuclear engineering in Louisiana and working part-time on an oil rig. Kid I went to high school with, unspeakable act registry, there for the worst sort of that particular crime too. I can't say the word on YouTube. I have a better one, but it's more of a where were they then? My biological father pieced out when I was in maybe 6th grade. When I was about 24, I hadn't seen him since. I lived on the other side of the country from my hometown. I was in a band with some friends and we called ourselves Delta 9, short for Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. Anyways, I decided to Google the name to see if any other bands were using that name. Being on the green herb at the time, I soon lost myself in the Google results and was just reading interesting stuff about green herb. I happened across an Amazon link. It turned out to be my father's dissertation on the effects of THC on mice. I had no idea. Pregnant, 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 married, married, pregnant, dead, dead, graduated college and doing quite well for himself, dropped out of high school, semi-successful DJ, pregnant. There was this one kid I was an absolute jerk to back in primary school. That's elementary school for you Americans. Not just me, but the entire class just picked on this one guy for some god-unknown reason. I can't remember it, but it was bad. So bad it got to the point where I threw a stick at him and split his mouth open. I felt absolutely terrible the moment I threw the stick, but everyone laughed at him whilst he screamed on the floor, blood pouring out of his mouth. So I dragged him off to the nurse, told her what I'd done and got detention for a week. Well deserved to me, I think. Now, this kid wasn't exactly the best-looking kid around, but who was at 9 years old? Lots of puppy fat, smelled a bit funny, and was just a bit awkward. After the incident, I talked to him a bit more and he turned out to be really nice. I lost contact with him when I moved school 2 weeks later. 10 years pass and I accidentally bump into him at the shops. I didn't even recognize the guy. He knew me though, and he got handsome as F. No homo, but the guy was good looking, well-dressed, lean, and just incredibly happy. All I could say was how sorry I was about throwing that stick a decade ago, but he brushed it off and laughed like it never happened. He was going great in life and actually thanked me for being a jerk to him. Apparently, if myself and the other guys hadn't bullied him, he probably would have stayed the same person as he was before. Now, I definitely don't condone any form of bullying, as I've been on both ends of the shtick, no pun intended, but I was glad he'd risen so far above me and become this fantastic guy. I really hope he succeeds in life, he genuinely deserves it. As for me, I can only hope I'll end up as good a person as him. When I was 16 or 17, I was hanging out with this really strange kid every now and then. He was a racist, fascist, Third Reich enthusiast with a huge interest and great taste in everything 60s, 70s, and 80s music, and an awesome collection of music original reel-to-reel audio tapes with an accompanying awe-inspiring collection of old recorders. He used to go on and on about the N-words, and then went on in starry-eyed admiration of Jimi Hendrix, and managed to make a seamless transition to how great the leader of the Third Reich was, all while trying to keep toning down his sentiments to appease my really liberal left-wing views. One of the most messed up and twisted people I've ever known. And of course, he did substances. Lots and lots of substances. Alcohol, speed, white snow, molly, just about everything else you can think of in quantities I've never seen in my entire life. And he went through tons of the stuff in every evening, popping pills like Smarties. He constantly got in trouble with his parents, brother, the cops, a lot of shady characters. Never finished anything, school or several apprenticeships, failed all of them. He sometimes moved in with his grandma, sometimes his parents, always until someone kicked in the door and raided the place. Sometimes the cops, sometimes someone he had beef with, or occasionally even himself when he forgot where he had his keys. One of the most effed up people you can imagine, but he was fun to hang out with, every 2 months or so, as he was kind of exhausting as well. I occasionally met him on my way to or from work when I was older, always when he was drunk or on something else, while he himself was on his way to or from work as well. And then I lost contact and no one else heard from him, so I figured he had to be in prison, rehab, or dead. Either was imaginable or preferable to his regular lifestyle. A couple of weeks ago, I learned he's married and building a house. Boom, went my mind. I think I actually have a really interesting one. I was friends with this guy named Willie in junior high. He was my only friend there. We were close but lost contact after I moved a couple of cities over. Flash forward 5 years and my sister starts dating this guy who's my age. I meet him and lo and behold, it's my old friend from junior high. Except he's changed. He's obviously on something. I spotted it almost immediately as I walked in. I noticed the pockmarks from injections. It turns out my friend from junior high was now dating my sister and is addicted to smack. Fast forward 18 months and now he's wanted for grand larceny. So this isn't someone I actually looked up, I just heard it on the grapevine, but it's a pretty weird story. A guy from my secondary school class had moved to Australia, presumably for work, and while he was there, he evidently got a bit lonely. He hired a working girl, but got a bit of a shock when he discovered that she was in fact a pre-op transsexual. Somehow he didn't discover this until after they had done the deed. In a poorly thought-out act of revenge, he stole her handbag, which contained her passport. She was Indonesian, and he sent her a text demanding $100,000 for the handbag and passport back. So, what was her response to this? She called the frickin' cops. He was arrested and charged with theft and extortion. Moral of the story, don't try to extort people who haven't done anything illegal because they'll just call the cops, you jerk. In short, a guy moved to Australia and slept with a working girl, got freaked out when he discovered she was transsexual and stole her passport and demanded $100,000 for it back. She called the cops and had him arrested. What's the cringiest thing you've seen a bride and groom do for their wedding? At a classmate's wedding, they were young, maybe like 22 or 23, there's apparently a caking tradition in some parts of the country where they cut the wedding cake and the couple feed each other a bit and smear each other's faces with cake as a joke. The bride had made it 1,000% clear to the groom she did not want to be caked. And he did it anyways. Not just a little smear, but full-on smushed the slice in her face. She was stunned initially, and then got up, face full of cake, and yelled, "You butthole! I told you not to do that!" then ran to the back area in reception. The groom tried to follow, but the bridesmaids and mother of the bride stopped him dead. So he sat at the head table awkwardly while half the wedding party rushed off with the bride. She stayed back there for like an hour. They eventually did let him back there to check on her, and we could hear her crying and them arguing. The rest of the reception came to a screeching halt until one of the bride's aunts emerged and directed the servers to clear the tables and put on some music. They got divorced 2 years later. The bride showed up almost 2 hours late to her own wedding. Southern California in an open field, no water and no shade. She shows up and wants to get married in her yoga outfit, and the groom shuts this down, and when she refuses to change her clothes, the groom decides to leave her looking stupid and they never got married. I've now spoken with my uncle and it turns out he had speculation that his fiancée was sleeping with her personal trainer. When she showed up in her yoga outfit, it was all he needed to call off the wedding. She ended up married to her personal trainer and divorced again. The groom gave a speech thanking everyone for coming that devolved in the space of about 2 minutes into a straight-up roast of his new brother-in-law. They were friends, and the brother-in-law seemed to take it in good humor, but there's only so much implication of, "I'm gonna be railing your sister tonight," that you can take before it becomes really cringy. It didn't help that A, I barely knew anyone there because I was a +1, and B, I was on the table with the elderly relatives from that side of the family who were less than amused. They sang their vows to each other. Neither of them had a singing voice. The vows were generally bat-crap crazy, like being submissive in the bedroom and not asking about where she was going. The auto-tune microphones were a terrible idea. Their vow songs shared a chorus, and it was awful, and they expected the guests to sing along with the chorus. And the vow singing lasted 20 minutes. Pure cringe. Look, I can deal with most of that as it's their special day and we need to facilitate them as much, if not more than they facilitate their guests on the day, and I'll even try to smile and gag on the truth as I tell you how wonderful it was, but the point where you lose me is the 20 frickin' minutes. That's absolutely horrific. I wasn't a guest, I was just working the wedding. The bride got drunk and sat on some other guy's lap for 2 hours and flirted with him while the groom sat by himself at the head table with a defeated look on his face. Does dying on the inside count regarding the "until death do us part" clause? Because he might have an out that way. They invited all their friends and expected 700 people, and like less than 100 showed up. This one wasn't the bride and groom's fault, but the pastor marrying them talked about his marriage and his kids for 20 minutes. He was obviously going for something and showing what marriage will be like, but he went on talking about his daughter Kelsey learned to walk this way and his other daughter's first words were this and that he and his wife made love throughout the house because that's what you do when you're in love. The bride and the groom had to stand there holding hands for 20 minutes right in front of him as the other 150 of us had to listen about his bedroom life and his kids. The groom sang his vows. I honestly had to stare at the floor and slow breathe to not laugh and get through it. Okay, I'd forgotten about this because it was like 25 years ago, but I went to a wedding where the bride did something similar. The thing was, she was so nervous she actually chucked up before singing her song, right there at the front of the church. Luckily, she had moved off to the side to sing. They'd set up a little separate stage there. So she blew chunks, sang her song, someone ran in and cleaned it up pretty quickly, and then they did the vows. The funny part is we'd all kind of moved on and didn't think about it during the ceremony at all, which went really well until the kiss. And then the whole crowd groaned in unison. They bought an apple orchard after leaving the city for a simpler life, and really doubled down on the apple theme for the wedding. Apples everywhere, on the tables, in baskets, all around the venue, on the podium where they got married, pictures of apples hanging everywhere, small fake trees with apples tossed under them. The guy marrying them had an apple tie on, apples somehow incorporated into every dish for the reception, and the cake was shaped like an apple. It was really frickin' bizarre. They sold the orchard a couple of years later because they had no idea what they were doing with the place. When I was in high school, one of my hockey teammates had a kid with his girlfriend when they were juniors. They decided to get married, and the wedding was officiated by my teammate's dad, who also happened to be our head coach. The entire wedding was the bride and groom's direct family and the hockey team at a Golden Corral. Then the reception was at the same Golden Corral. Then we had a hockey game that night. The other team we played that night somehow found out about it and hounded the guy the whole time. They were a bunch of jerks. An acquaintance I knew where the pastor marrying them told the couple to divorce their friends under the promise that it would make them a stronger couple or some crap like that. And they followed that advice. So pretty much after the wedding and reception, they just never again talked to any of the friends they'd invited to celebrate their big moment. I thought they'd be divorced within a year, but turns out they're still together. But yeah, apparently married couples aren't allowed to have friends? I've worked over 200 weddings at the same venue. Many couples wanted fireworks, and we had a company that would always do a show. The couple always, without fail, would pick Firework by Katy Perry to play during the show. The ceremony was also the name reveal. They changed their last name because they didn't want to be stuck to their heritage and didn't want anything to hold them back. Turns out they changed their name thinking they could erase their mountains of debt or at least hide from it. Turns out you can't live under two legal identities. Oh, I have two. First, the bride decided to sing as she walked down the aisle. She wasn't a particularly talented singer, and she was singing over a Carrie Underwood song so we could all hear the original vocal track. She finished walking about halfway through the song, and then stood there and sang the rest of the song at the groom, and all we could do was sit there and watch. And the second? Well, at a different wedding, they began the wedding with the groom playing an out-of-tune guitar and singing to the bride. They were sitting on chairs in front of everyone, legit 400 people, and the bride was clearly uncomfortable, which made everyone else uncomfortable. That wedding also included a foot-washing ceremony, and when the bride put her shoes back on, she tripped on her dress and fell flat on her face. They hadn't done the vows yet, and the ceremony stopped for 20 minutes to deal with the nosebleed that she had given herself. Man, there's a surprising amount of weddings where the couples in question just decide that they're going to take advantage of everyone's goodwill and become musical stars for one day, huh? Gotta respect the drive, even if it sounds like the ones that do this really can't sing and seem to carry it on for a tortuous amount of time. 20 minutes seems to be the average. Bride takes 3 hours to appear. After the ceremony, she and her spouse go up in an air balloon, and that marriage did not last a year. My cousin and his wife are super religious and may be the two most awkward people I've ever met. They did one of those fake-out first dances where it starts with a slow song and then transitions to a dance number with an upbeat song. Not only is that naturally cringeworthy, the upbeat song was 5 minutes long, and they just kept repeating the same moves over and over for what felt like an eternity. There was no booze allowed at the wedding, so there was nothing to dull the pain. Flew away in a helicopter at the end, but there were only appetizers for food. My own wedding. My brother and our wedding band surprised us with a beautiful rendition of a very romantic song by a guy called Juan Luis Guerra, and it just so happened to be me and the missus's favorite song ever. Lots of happy crying and one of the best memories from that day. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law doesn't like to be one-upped, so she impromptu just got a distant second cousin from her side of the family who we didn't know to immediately sing My Heart Will Go On from Titanic. He was not a good singer and used a crappy YouTube karaoke track, and it led to a very awkward, slow dancing. Followed by fuming from my mother-in-law after we cut it short. Terrible feedback from trying to play the track on the mic from the phone speaker. It just completely deflated the beautiful moment from my brother's singing. At least I'm happy to say we're still going strong and have been married for 10 years now. It should go without saying that little poop nugget of singing was not included in our wedding video. Imagine not refusing to go sing in this situation. The mother-in-law must have threatened the second cousin with something real good. The groomsmen prepared a skit in which they lost the groom at the reception and proceeded with over-the-top, hands-on-hips, one guy saying in the fakest cartoony voice, "Hey, aren't we missing something? It can't be me because I'm always prepared." Winks and pauses for laughs. "What about your bow tie?" "Oh no!" Produces tie, puts it on, waits for audience reaction. "No, wait, it's the groom. Where could he possibly be?" Acting like some high school musical crap. None of the guests were prepared and silently fussed around with their drinks and silverware. This went on for a bit. I don't remember it at all because I was on my phone, not really doing anything but avoiding eye contact every time they said a line and desperately scanned across the audience. When the whole thing ended, they anticipated like a standing ovation, but it went over the heads of everyone. A lone voice muttered, "Well, that was kinda weird," and the thespians made their exit quietly. The groom came out through the door when he was cued shortly afterwards. I don't think he knew about the skit. Thank God he wasn't there to see it unfold. As for the crowd, who isn't going to clap and whistle when the newlyweds show up at a wedding, so it was all good. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Oh, friends of friends. Young, uber-Christian, small-town naive girl meets married, much older man with 2 kids. Falls in love, and he does eventually leave his wife. Doesn't want any custody. The wedding was her hometown church. His vows were over the top about how he's never felt love before. She's the only woman he ever wanted to marry. He's been so lonely his whole life. He's literally sobbing through it all. Her turn to say her vows, and she's standing there saying nothing for at least 3 beats. Then she's handed a microphone and the piano starts playing. She's made up her own song, which are her vows. After the ceremony, we adjourn to the church basement for the alcohol-free reception, and I'm somehow roped into serving the groom's cake. It's 2 NASCAR car cakes made with an edible photo draped over the cake shapes and is impossible to cut through without mangling the cake, so I have to peel that photo off. My friend is cutting the bride's cake, and it's a full inch or more of fondant on top of plain cake. No frosting. The buffet was potluck from her family. Food you'd expect at a kid's party. Pink punch was the only thing to drink. No dancing because of her religion. Then they left in a 2-horse-drawn carriage for their honeymoon at the town's only hotel, which was like a Motel 6-level dump. Dated a girl in my 20s and went to her friend's wedding in upstate New York. In the middle of the service, the minister's cell phone rang, and he answered it. It was God. God wanted to talk to the groom. The conversation lasted a couple of minutes, and then the ceremony continued. Instead of throwing rice or confetti or just sprinkles or anything like that, the bride and the groom asked their friends to save all their empty Yule pods and throw those as they walked down the aisle. The friends obliged. Please chuck garbage at us as we leave the church. Sure sets the tone for the marriage. At the beginning of the reception, we all had to stand up and sing the national anthem. To be clear, this was another country I'd never been to a wedding in before, so I thought, okay, maybe this is just a tradition I've never heard of before. Then I told this to other people and they were all like, no, it's just really weird. Also, at that wedding, the father of the groom ended his speech with what I'm sure he thought was an amazing joke on how it's easier to build a bridge to Hawaii than to understand what a woman is thinking. It would have been awkward enough had the man also not been standing between his ex and current wife as he was delivering it. I was at a wedding when I was 8, and instead of the bride and groom getting up to make their speech thanking everyone, they'd done it like an awards show. So the DJ opened an envelope, announced their names, and they were handed an awards statue, a Barbie and Ken doll, and proceeded to thank everyone in the form of an awards speech. In the right hands, it might have been funny, but the bride and groom are incredibly shy by nature, so it was just awkward. I'm in my 30s now, and I still remember this. My wife and I don't dance, so we hadn't danced together before our wedding dance. Loved it, but it was probably cringeworthy from the outside. I know a guy who recently made his lackeys, friends, compete to be his best man. The most pretentious thing I've ever seen. Watching them grovel was so upsetting to me. If it's just to get out of the agony of that decision, I could maybe understand. But then again, this implies that they're giving him gifts or doing things to demonstrate their friendship, which is honestly just a gross thing to do to your friends. If someone announced this, I'd probably just tell them that I'd see them at the wedding and enjoy not having to come up with a speech for the absolute idiot. I went to a wedding once where they did a potluck. I guess it's okay depending on the type of wedding, but the reception was at a fairly nice venue, the wedding couple was like an hour and a half late, and the best man didn't have a speech ready to go, so it went on for a very painful 15 to 25 minutes. Also stating in there that they're going to have great bedroom fun times now that they're married. This was a devout Christian wedding with many of the friends, including me, from the church. By the time we got back to the table to eat, I was lucky if I'd got something that was kept warm in a crock pot, but everything else was room temperature. We were able to go home between the ceremony and the reception, but I bet most of the food had been sitting in people's cars since that morning. Oh, and also, the church that she moved to did the whole no kissing before marriage thing, and she started making out with her new husband on the altar to the point where the pastor had to say, "Okay, that's enough." The whole thing was weird. Bride entered to Braveheart soundtrack blasting on a boombox. The civil service that lasted a few minutes started at around 1 p.m. She leaves to the same blasting Braveheart soundtrack. The mother announces that the reception starts at 5:30 p.m. There's no food and no bar, but trays of dessert bars that will be served. We're also told the venue is locked until then, so there's no place to wait. My girlfriend and I left with a crowd of people to across the street at an Irish pub for drinks. A bit of a party breaks out. We all get told to knock it off and come back and wait at the venue in the hall. So we sit on the hall on the carpet for a few hours without drinks or dinner. Bride and groom arrive and enter the venue to an honor guard of floor hockey players wearing hockey jerseys and holding sticks above their heads like swords at a royal wedding. More Braveheart music, of course. The place emptied out pretty quickly as people either left to go back to the pub or to the fast food place a bit further away. Our dinner was lemon squares and a can of Coke from a vending machine in the lobby. Funny stuff. It's a tie between my sister breaking her knee at her own wedding dancing to the Cotton-Eyed Joe, and my sister having her reception at an honest-to-God truck stop while 6 months pregnant. In her defense, the food was good, but wow, was it weird walking through a gas station in formal wear. For some unknown reason, she'd latched onto this weird truck stop restaurant that my family goes to sometimes for late dinners, since it's open 24 hours. The food was buffet style, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and salad. We did have a private room, which was very weird that it existed. The only way to get into the restaurant is to walk through the attached gas station. It felt very redneck, considering how non-redneck my stepsister typically is. I officiated that wedding though, so I guess I can't judge too harshly. My friend's wedding. The bride wanted to sing him a song, so she did a kind of karaoke thing. There's bad singing, and then there's whatever the hell that was. It was so awkward. Also, dude asked a professional photographer friend of ours to photograph the wedding about a year before. Got a super non-committal answer, never followed up, and was shocked that the photographer didn't show up, after he specifically declined the invitation because he was going to be in another country. Had the entire set of groomsmen rent ridiculously expensive tuxedos, which, fine, cool, happy to be here. He's having his tux custom-tailored and asks for something ridiculous and gaudy, but when quoted the price, says he can't swing that and insists they do it for about a quarter of that price. They do their best to meet the specifications within the given price range, but it's bad. Really bad. So the groomsmen look amazing and he looks like a clown that didn't put on his makeup. Has another friend make a custom batch of mead for the toasts, but rents a hall that doesn't allow outside alcohol, so it can't be used for the toast during the reception. It was probably the cringiest thing I've ever seen. Not just the cringiest wedding or even cringiest thing at a wedding. The cringiest thing, period. The minister or pastor used to date the bride and gushed about how wonderful she was. Told the groom that if he ever died, not to worry, he'd take care of her. I was shell-shocked. I so wished I could think of a reason to ask the couple for a copy of the video of their wedding, but I couldn't quite find a legit one. Probably my cousin's wedding. The food was really bad, and I mean really bad. Things that were supposed to be warm or hot were ice cold and completely undercooked. There was music, but no one was allowed to dance because we don't want people to dance on our wedding. There was also no alcohol. Not a single drop. But the worst thing was the seating arrangement. They didn't plan on families or friends sitting together. I don't know what they were thinking. I was sitting on a table with complete strangers. They even separated our grandparents from one another. After an hour, my grandmother stood up, walked over to my grandfather, and both declared that they were leaving now to the restaurant down the road in order to have something good to eat and a beer. I joined them as well as my parents. It didn't take long for people to notice that our seats were empty. Really easy to figure out since no one was allowed to dance or walk around in general. We got a call from one of my uncles asking where we were at. After we explained why we left, he said, "You know what? You're right. This is bullcrap." And we ended up with like 20 guests from the wedding in that small restaurant having a fun evening. I still don't know why they even bothered celebrating their wedding. They also never invited us again. And that's actually a good thing because now I don't need to find an excuse as to why I can't join their future, quote, parties. Okay, so as soon as the bride and groom went out to the church, everyone went to go congratulate them and give gifts, which are usually flowers or alcohol and envelopes. The bride had a pen and a notebook, and she signed each envelope or wrote in a notebook if someone didn't give her an envelope. Later, as we went to the restaurant where the party was about to start, we waited for 2 hours for the pair. Turns out they made a stop during their ride to count the money. As they finally got to the party, they started complaining that they didn't make enough to pay for the party expenses and earn more. They only spent time with the rich part of the family. The poor tables didn't get the good cakes and food. There was literally different food on some tables. I sat near our poor part of the family. No meat or cakes made it to their table. Me and like 7 other people didn't get forks, only spoons. Why would you give forks to someone when there's only soup for them to eat, right? Now, mind you, I gave them enough to pay for like 5 plates per person, and I helped them during preparations. I even baked a few cakes that I didn't get to eat in the end. Half of the people got out after like 20 minutes. The bride called them all terrible for ruining her dream wedding. It was the worst wedding ever, and that's just a part of the whole wedding mess. I wish I'd had a car back then so I could go back home as well, as the wedding was terrible for many other reasons. The groom was cheap, and the bride was a Karen to be. What's the worst monster you've ever had for a neighbor? When my wife and I moved into our house in the summer of 2019, the neighbors on either side of us warned us about the people renting the house directly behind ours. Apparently, they'd been known to cause trouble and blow things way out of proportion, bordering on paranoia of everyone around them. We kept it in mind, but had no issues for the first 6 months or so after moving in. Their house sits on a hill behind ours, and so overlooks the majority of our backyard due to the elevation change. Well, one night, or morning technically, at about 3 a.m., we wake up to ring notifications from our phones showing video from our front doorbell. There's a man standing barefoot in a sleeveless shirt on our porch pounding on our front door. We give it 2 to 3 minutes of just watching him on the app thinking maybe he's drunk and has the wrong house, essentially giving him the benefit of the doubt. But then we start to hear him say, "Come out, you frickin' prevert, I'm gonna F you up," etc. And then he leaves the porch and starts to head around the side of the house towards our backyard. Considering we had no idea who this was, my wife now immediately calls the cops as I move out of our bedroom towards the external doors to look and listen for any attempt at a home invasion. At this point, our neighbors directly behind us throw a huge spotlight onto our backyard from theirs. We're thinking, okay, cool, they know something's up and they're trying to help us out by shedding light on our backyard. The cops arrive several long minutes later and knock. We explain the situation and they head out back to look around and get the scoop from the neighbors with the spotlight. It turns out that the spotlight neighbor was the one on our porch. He'd jumped our fence into our backyard and up into his yard and then threw the light on. He told the police that several nights prior I'd let my puppy out onto my own backyard in the middle of the night, and because I was in my boxers that I was trying to expose myself to his family, because they could look down onto our entire yard from where theirs sits. He then followed this up to the police with evidence which consisted of videos he'd taken through our windows of my wife and I inside our own home, doing totally normal things like chores and watching TV. Nothing inappropriate or scandalous, not that it would have mattered anyway because we were in our own home. Because of the elevation difference, if they went out of their way they could technically slightly see through our closed blinds due to the angle. So they'd been filming us for no reason at all and expected the police to see this as reasonable. The cops came back in and my wife was devastated. It was a huge breach of our privacy, of course, and totally unfounded accusations as we'd never done anything to anger these people. We hadn't even met them. The police told us, just don't worry about it, if he tries something again, just give us a call, which wasn't the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without any additional issues. My wife and I celebrated like it was a holiday when we saw the moving van in their driveway. I assume we'll have many more extended neighbor wars in the series to come, but this is for sure a very brief and spirited encounter with these crazies that clearly made you uncomfortable right up until they did you the favor of getting out of there. Lived in a small apartment and my neighbors always cranked up their music to 11, like loud, and until something like 7 a.m. Maybe it went later than that, but that's when I'd leave for work anyway. It was so loud that I couldn't hear my own TV over it. My neighbors and I would bang on the door, but they'd never open it. It was like trying to sleep at a festival. Then at some point, I found out that they often left for a bar across the street, but would just leave the music on. So I'd pull the breaker for their apartment, but they would just come back at 5 a.m. and turn it right back on. It was reported by heaps of people, but nothing was ever done. So at some point, I'd jam their lock when they went out so their keys wouldn't work anymore, and they had to get the property manager in while the music was blasting inside. After a couple of times of that happening, they were evicted. Maybe I'm the bad neighbor in this story. This is the definition of chaotic good. Their dogs got into my backyard and attacked my dog. My dog ended up okay, but it was a long recovery and he still doesn't walk right. He was and is the happiest dog ever, so to see him on the ground covered in blood was the worst thing ever. The dogs were able to get through because their kids had taken a plank out of my fence. They didn't have a fence. I left a letter on their door explaining the situation. They showed up at my door to tell me that it was my fault for not having a stronger fence, and that they wouldn't be paying any medical bills. After a lot of them yelling and me calmly explaining why they would actually be paying, they eventually complied. They did build a fence backwards with the flat side facing them. They're also loud as F, have chickens that escape on a regular basis in our suburban neighborhood, and are overall scummy people. When I started my first job post-college, I was thrilled to live by myself for the first time in my life. I had this beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a solid part of town. Everything was great until 6 months later when new tenants moved in next to my unit. I had a package go missing, a phone case. Amazon had posted a photo of it at my door, so I thought that it was just a fluke. Then it happened again, and again, and again. The office wouldn't accept packages, so I had to get my items delivered to my friends' places instead. Overall, wildly inconvenient, and the police didn't care in the slightest when I reported it, so I just figured I'd deal with it. Fast forward a few weeks, and I came home after being gone for less than an hour to see that my doorknob and front door were scraped up and the knob was barely hanging on. Long story short, I'd been parking in plain view of this guy's window, so he was able to tell when I was home. I'm 100% convinced he tried to break into my place, and that me coming home early interrupted him. I googled his name after I moved, I got it off a package at his door, and I found out he was a convicted felon with charges that included grand theft auto, domestic attacks, substance dealing, and an attempted break-in. Apartment building. The upstairs neighbor's dog peed on their patio and it dripped down onto me while I was sitting outside reading them. I yelled and ran in to shower, and when I texted them to ask them to take their dog out to pee in the future, they said it wasn't their dog, and it must have blown in from somewhere else? What? My worst neighbors were definitely the crap-bag 19-year-olds that lived next door to me when I was finishing up college, that screamed at Call of Duty at the top of their lungs through paper-thin walls every night when they got killed, and who also threw a pumpkin on the roof of my car, causing $3,000 worth of damage, which is considered felony vandalism in Michigan. I finally got them to confess and basically gave them a stern talking to as a 22-year-old that was just done with college nonsense at that point, and told him I wasn't going to press charges as long as his insurance paid for it. Later that year, when his roommate was flipping out about Call of Duty and yelled something along the lines of, "God damn it, frickin' hackers, everyone's frickin' cheating, what the frick is this bullcrap? I hate this game so much, bunch of frickin' losers and cheaters," which was very clear through my bedroom wall while I was studying, I didn't hesitate, since it had been months of this. After he got done with his tantrum, I shouted back, "Sounds like you just suck at COD, bro." I heard a crash of what sounded like a controller being banished to the Shadow Realm, and then didn't hear anything from him for about a month. It was glorious. Yeah, when I play with people who are cheating, I quit and report them. This was almost definitely a skill issue. If they're playing that often and still suck that badly, it's time to adopt a more accepting nature in defeat. Or just switch to single-player games. That's what the rest of us trash-tier gamers do. Oh, I have a few stories from the same neighbor who I'll call Linda. Linda would often have men outside the apartment building that she locked out, screaming her name. But the best story regards a boyfriend Linda had who insisted my roommate and I call him the Captain. About a week after meeting him, we came home to a wedding announcement for Linda and the Captain. Yes, his name was the Captain on the announcement. Exactly 1 week after that announcement, the Captain was arrested outside our apartment building for public intoxication at 2 a.m. while screaming, "I've made a huge mistake! F you, Linda! I'm ruined!" We rented a house that had another apartment in the basement. The lady who lived below us kept to herself for the most part, so we didn't see her much. Part of our rental was a detached garage, and she asked if she could put a small deep freezer in our garage. We were using it for storage, so we were fine with it. After a couple of weeks of having her freezer in there, it somehow got unplugged and she came unglued on us and wanted us to pay to replace everything. I understood her frustration, but we hardly ever went into the garage since it was only for storage. In other words, we definitely didn't unplug it and our landlord agreed. But she was mad. She had a son in college who came home for the summer. During that same summer, he found a cat and brought it home. His mum said no cats inside, so he'd feed the kitten outside. She was pretty wild. He left for school again in the fall, and we noticed that the cat was getting very thin. We started feeding her outside in the usual spot. Around Christmas, we bought a bag of cat food, and I made a plate of cookies and left them both at our neighbor's front door. The next day, they were both back on our porch. Rude, but whatever. We continued to feed the cat because she obviously wasn't feeding her. A few weeks later, the cat came to our door crying. She was trying to come inside. Super weird considering she was pretty wild and we'd never let her inside before. I let her in and noticed she was pregnant and for sure about to have babies. I made her a little corner and she had the babies the next day. We let her stay in the house with us, but we knew we couldn't keep her. I went downstairs to talk to the neighbor. She said that her son's cat was a boy, so the cat obviously wasn't his. I posted on Facebook to see if anyone was interested in fostering a cat and her kittens because we couldn't keep her. Her son saw my post on Facebook and got super mad at his mum. She then called the cops and said that I stole her cat and lied to her when she confronted me about having the cat in my possession. The police called animal control, who then contacted us. They asked us to take the cat and her kittens to the shelter so that if our neighbor really wanted the cats, she'd have to pay the fee as well as get her vaccinated and licensed. We did take them to the shelter, and as far as I know, she did pay the fees to pick her up. However, I did see her on the animal shelter's Facebook adoption page not long after that. Poor baby. For the record, I was heartbroken to have to take her into the shelter. I felt awful for moving her and her babies around like that. I'm sure that she was so anxious and scared. We would have tried to keep her, but we were moving to a new place that same week, hence the urgency to find her a foster home. And we weren't allowed to have pets. All authorities involved thought that she was nuts, and I think they were also frustrated to have to deal with this stupid situation. It was the stupidest, most infuriating thing that ever happened to me as far as neighbors go. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We had some neighbors that used to leave their garbage out in plastic bags the night before garbage day instead of leaving out bins. Around here, that's just ringing the dinner bell for raccoons and other critters. Sure enough, come morning, there's garbage strewn all over the neighborhood. What the raccoons and skunks didn't spread around, the wind picked up the slack. Some people on the street kindly approached the guy and asked him to put his garbage in a bin. He told them to go F themselves, and thus began garbage wars. Every morning of garbage day, some people on my street would collect all the half-eaten and rotten trash from their lawns and toss it back onto the guy's backyard. He'd collect it and then dump it back on their lawns, or cram it into their bushes. People started finding half-eaten burritos and candy wrappers in their mailboxes. The street just started to look like a slum. The police were called, health inspectors, city bylaw enforcement. Each side was calling in whatever authority they could muster to get their enemy in the crap. This guy and his family, amazingly his wife seemed perfectly pleasant, lasted about 8 months and then moved. Every once in a while I find a random margarine lid or piece of styrofoam in my hedge, and my mind goes back to those dark days of the war. I lived in an apartment with lots of rotating tenants. An elderly lady moved in across the hall from me and promptly started hoarding. I started to figure it out when her deck and porch started to fill up with odds and ends furniture, including but not limited to a roll-top desk. She also yelled at me once for taking her key out of the front door and putting it in the mail slot. Anyway, after a couple of weeks, I started to realize I hadn't seen her in a while and started to smell something really weird. Turns out she had passed away and no one knew about it for a week, hence the smell. Her family came and cleared out all of her stuff about a week afterwards. This is Wisconsin in the winter, and I had my good Doc Marten work boots outside my door because they were wet. They used one of my boots to prop open their door while they moved out and then stole them when they were done. Yeah, sadly, this is a thing that you hear about being fairly commonplace with elderly hoarders. One day, those towers of stuff fall down and the poor folks are trapped. Awful way to go. Also, trash moved by the family, first leaving grandma alone to expire like that, and then just doing a little bit of extra theft on the way out. He lived in the apartment right below my husband and I. It went from constant complaints, to him calling the cops on us multiple times, to him leaving threatening messages on our car and front door. When we first moved in, he was upset with the landlord for renting above him, and left plenty of unpleasant notes and interrupted quite a few times when we were talking to the landlord. When we moved in, we only had a mattress and no other furniture, but he kept calling the landlord saying that we were moving furniture around at 2 a.m. and had our TV on at full blast. After the 8th complaint in 2 months about us still moving our furniture around and TV being too loud, we finally showed our apartment to the landlord. We literally didn't have a TV and still only had our mattress. Then the neighbor started leaving notes on our car, telling us to keep it down, and he even put it in writing, "There needs to be no noise after 10 p.m. or else I'll call the cops." We usually didn't even get home until after 11 p.m., and we were respectful to make sure that we kept things down because we knew that not everyone had our work schedule. So we tried keeping it down even more, and there were so many instances when we'd be eating our dinner or cuddling quietly or even sleeping, and then he'd be banging on his ceiling or our floor. After a few months, he started calling the cops, and it got to the point where even the cops told him to stop calling about a noise complaint because it's a landlord issue. And every time they came, they never heard anything. The last time they showed up, I was asleep, and my husband ended up talking to them and explaining everything. They suggested that we file a harassment complaint. Then the cops showed up at the coffee shop I worked at the time and explained that they were getting almost nightly calls, and they suggested to me, too, that we should file a harassment complaint against the neighbor. Then he started leaving threatening notes on our car and front door, and we kept hearing our doorknob jiggling. He claimed that he and a friend had sat outside our apartment for 2 hours and listened to all the noise we were making, that he's a retired cop and would call in a few favors if we kept making noise. He knows where we park, so we'd better start parking it somewhere else if we don't want it to get damaged. We kept the notes and made copies for the landlord and let him know that this was what we were dealing with, so we're just keeping him in the loop before crap started getting real, aka, we're tired of this, and if an old guy gets his crap rocked, then just know that it's been a long time coming. The last complaint was when he ran outside to the landlord screaming that something needed to be done about us because he heard our bed squeak the night before, and how dare he rent to some crazy college kids who were partying and having wild group fun times in the bedroom all night. The landlord finally told him to F off and stop being a bitter old man. Then the neighbor took a total 180 and we found out he'd decided to sue the landlord and was moving. Suddenly the neighbor kept offering us rides when one of us were walking. He stopped complaining and leaving notes, but our doorknob kept jiggling and turning around at midnight. And whenever we'd check on our door, we'd hear someone running down the hall as we'd approach our door. He eventually moved away, and shockingly, we haven't gotten a complaint from any other neighbor in the last 3 years we've lived here. I rented a flat with an ex, and the upstairs neighbor was an absolute nightmare. Deadbeat dad who had his kid every weekend and left them screaming all the time. He'd blast music until sunrise every day, even when he had his kid. We got the council involved and nothing happened. Got child services involved. Nothing happened. He used to argue every Sunday with his ex about how he wasn't paying child support. They'd argue right outside our door when we were on the ground floor. The guy was unemployed, owed the landlord a lot of money, and only left his flat to get groceries or substances. He kicked off at me because my cat meowed loudly one time. Well, they were smackheads, plain and simple. They had 2 kids and were constantly physically and verbally rowing at each other and were hoarders on top of it. Tried calling Child Protective Services and the police over and over, and it was never taken seriously. They ended up burning down their apartment and caused thousands of dollars in damage to the rest of our apartment building because they were cooking crystal. We had to move out, as did so many others. The silver lining was that they finally got their kids taken away after that. This dude pretended to be a reverend but was actually just a filthy frickin' hoarder. He insisted on wearing sandals all of the time, and whenever he left his flat, the entire stairwell would stink of century-old unwashed feet. Eventually, the beetles that had infested his flat crawled up into our kitchen and then everywhere. It took months to get him evicted. Screw that guy. Had one that would basically steal our mail and other stuff from our porch and yard. Caught her once to confront her, and she started yelling at me to stop attacking her and tried to say I was stealing her stuff. Ended up with the police getting called and us filing a restraining order against her. How much space does a neighbor have to give you on a restraining order? I'm guessing they're not expected to have to move from parts of their house that are within the radius of said order. I've never known anyone to have one in real life. They're a strange concept to me. Moved into a crappy apartment in a building that was occupied by basically the worst people in the area. Pretty rural small town, junkies, alcoholics, and other interesting specimens. I moved there because I don't have a driver's license and I needed to live close to my new job at a cafe. There were no buses in the area except school buses, and it was relatively cheap to live there. Anyways, one night when I came home from work, I met 2 of my neighbors by the entrance to the building. These 2 were living wall to wall with me, and I'd listened to their substanced-up saturnalias more than once. They started following me up the stairs, not saying a single word, just following me. I rushed inside and locked the door, and then they started hammering at it. Yelling, hammering their hands at the door so hard I thought they'd break it. I yelled back at them, "What the frick do you want? Leave me alone." They stopped their hammering, and the man said with a fragile voice, "We were just wondering if we could borrow your pee for a substance test tomorrow." I not so politely declined and told them to F off and called the cops. Didn't live there for much longer, I'll tell you that. I used to live in a house that was split into 2 apartments. My neighbors had the lower half, and I learned we had issues with the HVAC when their cigarette smoke came visibly pouring out our registers, stank up everything we owned, and then one of them stole my car. My neighbors create this toxic smoke out of their chimney, which we suspect is them making illegal substances. Our neighbor was tossing bags of her upchuck into my yard for about a year, like 50 bags. I called the cops. Turns out she had an eating disorder and was hiding it from her parents. My neighbor once shot both of my dogs and his goat and made me bury both of them. One dog survived, thankfully. He then tried to make me pay for a new goat, claiming that our dogs attacked it. The goat had a bullet wound and no bite marks. I have a schizophrenic neighbor that has believed for years that I'm hacking his electronic devices, scanning his phone, harassing and terrorizing him. Over the years, he's claimed that I've held an old man hostage in my condo and allowed blood to drip from my patio to his, and that I'm a terrible racist. He leaves notes on the inside of his car accusing me of these things. This guy owned 6 cars and kept them all parked on the street in a very congested block of apartments. Spent hours tending to them, and they somehow always looked rustier when he was done. If a leaf landed on one of his cars, he'd accuse the neighborhood of intentionally placing leaves on his car to annoy him. My current neighbors will randomly light bombshell fireworks in the middle of the night during the middle of the week, as if some of us don't have to wake up early for work. Also, when I was younger and living in a different city, our front neighbors stole our dog from our backyard one day, and we didn't find out it was them until a few months later when we saw our dog in their yard. They denied they stole it and wouldn't give it back to us until we got the cops involved. Tour guides. What absolute wildcards have you had to deal with in your tours? I led a scuba diving tour. While signing the safety waivers and all that, one very old man kept telling us that he had a DNR, a Do Not Resuscitate order. We plainly told him that we're not bound to a DNR, and if he passed out for any reason, we'd attempt to resuscitate by our safety training. Pretty much all the divers are just assuming that this guy is going to try and bookend the story of his life down there, probably by spitting out the regulator and going quietly into the night. The dive happens, and pretty much everyone is hawk-eyed on this guy. I see him go behind a large coral head and lay down in the sand and spit out his reg. He's only at about 60 feet depth, so I grab him and wrestle him to the surface. He won't take my backup regulator, so I slam it against his mouth and purge air into his face. We get to the surface and he's fighting me non-stop, trying to pull all of his gear off. I throw a very hard punch to his jaw and knock him out. We're actually trained to do this during dive rescues to keep panicked people from killing us as well. 3 weeks later, he tries to sue my dive shop and myself personally. Thankfully, it ended up getting dropped, but it did take a while. In short, a guy tried to use our business to not be alive anymore and traumatize a whole bunch of other people in the process. About 15 years ago, I worked as a deckhand on a line of boats that took people out to Fort Sumter. The trip was about an hour each way. One day, we were about halfway there, and 2 teenagers just decided it would be fun to jump off and swim to shore. This is in Charleston Harbor, which has a pretty solid tidal current and probably more sharks than one would like to think about. We ended up having to perform a water rescue on them, then continue onto the fort with the Coast Guard coming and picking them up. All in all, an extreme act of stupidity. I used to do vineyard and garden tours for a pretty well-known winery. I had a lady ask to see any Merlot vines we had, so I walked her over, and she proceeded to dump ash all over them and yell, "We love you, Nana! Rest in peace!" Needless to say, you're not allowed to dump human remains on food goods. I should mention the ashes came out of a gallon Ziploc baggie. It was a Christmas-themed one though, so maybe that makes it more tasteful. Well, that's alright then. As long as the Ziploc bag with the desiccated remains of Grandma was festive. Feels like you wanted a fitting anecdote to end her life story with, and instead probably got a walkout by security and got that vine uprooted as well. I'm a bush pilot in Alaska and occasionally do glacier air tours if my boss asks me. I'm not a fan of doing tours in general though. One day I was doing a glacier tour and had probably 7 people on board, and the guy sitting next to me just looks at me and says, "I'm the captain now," and yanks the plane 30 degrees to the right, and then lets go and laughs and says he was just kidding. There was yelling to follow via my mouth. I work in the backcountry ski guiding industry, working my way to becoming a lead guide. Guests are always trying to unalive themselves, but there's one that stands out. Right now, I mostly tail guide and pick up people when they fall, which is most of the time. One particularly deep day, I'm sweeping a tree run and all of a sudden there's a man digging frantically in the snow towards a pair of legs. His wife had fallen headfirst down the slope in a flat area. When she lawn darted, the first half of her body was buried in the snow and only her legs and feet were visible. Her husband thought it was a good idea to stand on top of where her face obviously was and started digging near the exposed part of her body. I guess in the moment he forgot human anatomy and where her head might be. At this point, I was maybe 3 minutes behind him, so she'd had her face under the surface for a while. I told him to stop and move, and then yelled, "Stop! You're on her face!" I tried adding a couple of expletives, but there was no response from him. I finally had to grab him by the backpack and powerbomb him down the slope. I uncovered her face in like 10 seconds. She gasped for air, had a cry, and then proceeded to tear that man to pieces verbally. I used to be a tour guide at a primate sanctuary with a strict no-touching policy. At the end of the tour, there's a suspension bridge. Tourists go first, guide goes last as per the rules. I always warn the tourists that the other side is the territory of the Hanuman Langur, and he doesn't mess around. Keep your distance, etc. He doesn't attack people out of nowhere, but he likes showing his teeth and screaming, which scares tourists. Anyway, one tour, I get to the other side of the bridge and a tourist has been bitten. He says a monkey just bit him out of nowhere. I ask the other tourists. No, he tried to fricking pet the Hanuman. Idiot got what he deserved. I was on a tour in New Orleans. A guy gets drunk and basically makes a fool of himself and slaps his partner. Everyone else on the tour is like, "Whoa, not cool, take a hike." Girlfriend leaves with him. The next morning, we're all on the bus waiting to roll out to the next destination and we're not moving. 30 minutes later, we're all getting real angry and then the couple get on the bus looking sheepish. By the next stop, we learn the drunk guy ran a bath at the hotel, passed out and it flooded the bathroom and 4 floors below into the hotel lobby. The hotel wouldn't let them leave without paying thousands of dollars. Karma for him, I think. So I was doing an English language camp for foreign kids. We took the kids on a day tour to London, which involved going up the London Eye. While in the queue, one of the kids started shouting that he had a bomb in his bag and he was going to blow everyone up. Almost got all 20 kids in the group kicked out. On an open-topped tour bus in London, a woman tries to dangle her toddler over the railing and then starts saying she's going to complain to my manager when I tell her to stop. Caught her doing it again, and company policy said that anyone endangering their kids like that was to be removed from the tour, so the driver had to come up and march her off. She still insisted she did nothing wrong, like she literally had the kid's feet on the side rail of the moving bus and was just holding him loosely around the waist. One low-hanging tree branch, of which there were many on the route, and that kid would have been gone. I was working on a tourist island in Australia when this man pulled out almost all of the back feathers of a peacock because he wanted to keep one. He snuck up behind it, grabbed a huge handful and just yanked. He was immediately escorted off the island. The peacock had a huge bare patch and most of its beautiful feathers were gone. I used to work at a heritage site. It was an old military installation with a lot of remaining original structures like bunk beds, cafeteria equipment, computers, among other stuff. Every day, it was a constant effort to remind people, read kids, to not jump on the beds, not to slam doors open, and not to punch every button like it owes them money. The absolute worst was a group of kids on a school trip. Within the first 10 minutes, we're walking through the tech portion of the exhibit, where we had a wall lined with Burroughs' large systems machines, B5000s, all behind this little fence about waist high. I turned to demonstrate some of the pieces, and when I look back at the group, one of them has jumped the barrier, opened one of the units and started pulling out handfuls of digital tape from the reels inside. I just about jumped on the kid when their teacher did just that. She jumped the barrier, smacked the kid's hands and took him outside. I immediately ended the tour and had them all refunded, as I couldn't imagine what else could happen. My one took a big dump in front of the group. So we tour through streets and parks and make it really clear that the toilets at the beginning of the tour are the only ones for the first 90 minutes. We get to a park about 30 minutes into the tour. Not a big park, mind you, it's basically a big roundabout with a swing set, bench, and 2 trees. I'm in the middle of my spiel in the park when I see a guy at the back of the group step away, pull his pants down, and squat on the grass. Of course, I was stunned and lost my flow, which had everyone looking around only to recoil in horror as this guy drops a log like it was nothing. He wasn't even ashamed. I took a class of middle schoolers to a museum, and one of my jerk students dragged his hand across a 3,000-year-old Indian painting. Later, I found out the object was almost certainly a reproduction, but I nearly died of rage on the spot. The student was with us on a 45-day placement for severe behavioral issues. He had earned enough points in school to qualify for the field trip. Never again, kid. I work at a brewery tap room and take people on brewery tours. During fermentation, CO2 is produced and excess comes out through a runoff pipe and into a water bucket. One of the attendees, who was being a pain and trying to be funny but no one was laughing, asked me what the pipe was for, so I gladly explained. He then asked what would happen if he breathed it in. In disbelief of his stupidity, I told him he'd pass out and damage his brain. He then proceeded to grab the pipe and take a breath. He was then ejected and barred. Some people are just beyond belief. I think a lot of us wonder what happens to those kids at school who eat bugs or toxic things for the amusement of others in the playground. Turns out they're basically doing the same thing in all manner of locales decades later. What an idiot. My co-worker's story. He was a tour manager for South America. We tended to work with older travelers, like 60 or above. Him and his guests were flying from Lima to Cusco, Peru, which is about 10,000 feet in elevation. This is a group of about 40 travelers. Apparently, he had one male guest who had IBS or something, and in mid-flight, he crapped himself. The stench was unbearable as they were in a small aircraft taking them to Cusco so high in the mountains. He said he had to help escort this guy to the bathroom in the back, but as he stood up, the brown just came down his leg, so now he's dragging this stuff down with him to the toilet. Once he got to the loo, he cleaned it up with the assistance of the aircraft attendant. He was very embarrassed, but not as embarrassed as the guy who'd made brown. Once they landed, the guy who'd done this was in the bathroom, apologetic, and was cleaning himself up. The guide went into the airport and brought him some new Peruvian-style pants, and then came back to the airport to help dress this guy in the bathroom. I'd say that was probably one of the worst stories I've heard to happen to an individual. I've also heard of a fellow co-worker who guides tourists in Vietnam, and had to bail out a tourist from jail one time. She had received a phone call in the middle of the night from him, in jail, asking for help. She showed up and asked the man what happened. The Vietnamese police said he was caught purchasing little blue pills and exchanging money for favors from working girls. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked at a living history farm museum. I had a kid that was climbing on stuff the whole tour in the farmhouse and trying to get behind the smith in the blacksmith shop during a demo. After the tour, when people are allowed to roam the grounds, I hear his mum screaming and look over to the barn, and this kid has climbed the fence into the field with our longhorn oxen and is trying to poke them with a stick. I walk over and calmly told him to get out of the field before our lazy oxen decide they've had enough. But this little jerk decides to look me in the eye and smack Ted on the butt with the stick like it's a riding crop. Ted, bless him, just kinda jumps a little and whips his head around with a "what the frick, dude" look on his face. But seeing as he's a longhorn, he just kinda wipes this kid out with one of his horns when he's turned his head. The kid goes flying into the dirt and is having a meltdown. Mum is freaking out, and I'm like, dude, get the heck out of the pen before Ted actually gets mad. So this kid is crying and trying to climb the fence out of the field, and Bill, who's been watching this whole thing, waits until the kid is almost over the fence, walks up to him, and nudges him in the butt with his nose and pushes him over the top of the fence. It was everything I could do to keep from laughing. The kid was fine, Ted was fine, but the kid and his mum were promptly kicked out of the museum. Their dad and little sister were allowed to stay because she was well behaved and was just enjoying petting the goats at the zoo. Since the kid had to leave but his sister didn't, there was a temper tantrum in the parking lot that could be heard all the way on the other side of the farm. But the oxen got some extra grain that night, so I guess they won in the end. I was once a tour guide in high school for a group of young Chinese students coming to the rural US on a sort of fresh air trip. They told us beforehand that we had to keep the kids away from water because apparently parents don't value swimming lessons in China, and there is such little open, swimmable water that no one learns on their own. We were also told that the kids think swimming happens naturally. Like if you go into the water, you'll immediately start swimming. Anyways, one of our excursions was to a local reservoir, and the plan was to hike up a hill nearby to overlook the reservoir lake, get a few photos, and then leave. When we got to the top, it started pouring rain like I'd never seen before. I'm talking so much rain you can't see 5 feet in front of you. Then lightning starts striking the lake and I'm still trying to keep it cool even though I'd never been so close to lightning before. The kids were taking it well and laughing, which was good, until they started running directly for the lake and jumping in. Apparently, they'd also never learned about electricity conducting through water. So I'm freaking out and start pulling them out of the water. They weren't in very far. A couple of them complained that their phones were wet in the rain. No one got hurt, but it was a crazy day. We got back on the bus and the kids started drinking liquor in the back. Some of them were as young as 9 years old, the oldest were about 16, so I had to bust them for that too. In short, apparently Chinese kids think swimming will just happen if you go in water, especially lightning-struck water. Tour guide at a university. We got a lot of guests that really don't want to be there. Mostly misbehaved kids from a poor area of the city. We toured at all times, even during finals week. As many may know, sound can travel oddly in lecture centers. Our lecture centers have windows around them, and like 6 kids thought it would be hilarious to smash on the windows. From the inside, it sounded like small arms fire being shot from the outside, or at least muffled shots. I watched 100+ students flee the classroom during their final exam. We got a lot of crap for that. It really isn't easy corralling a group of school kids. That's the chaperone's job. A friend of mine does whiskey tours in a museum in Dublin. Someone took a dump in one of the exhibition rooms. I had a guest snorkeling, trying to grab the tail of a barracuda as he swam up behind it. Luckily, I was able to hit the guest with a dive fin from the boat to stop him before he got a hold. If he had grabbed on, I'm sure he would have been ripped to pieces by that fish. A couple of guys I used to play cricket with went on a school trip to Auschwitz and decided to steal a small pair of glasses and some buttons they found half buried in the ground. They were detained by Polish police while they were leaving the site. Hard to know what goes through people's heads sometimes. I watched a man run up to the side of the platform the winged victory statue is on in the Louvre and throw his arm around it for a photo. Security got him down pretty quickly. I'm shocked that he actually made it up there. That feels like it could have seriously ended in a security dogpile and criminal charges. You never know though, it's hard to prosecute people just for being stupid. I'm in the middle of talking and someone's phone rings. Okay, that happens sometimes and usually they just cancel the call or step outside. Nope, this guy answers the call and starts talking on the phone only a few meters from where I'm standing. I think, oh, he'll just quickly explain that he's busy and end the call. Nope. He starts a conversation. The rest of the group glare at him and I'm put in an awkward position because my workplace put a huge emphasis on politeness. So I suggest to him to continue his call in the hallway just outside the room we were in, to which he replied, "No, I'm fine here," and went back to his phone conversation. I'm doing my best to talk to the rest of the group, about 25 people, but he's so loud. Eventually, this Chinese woman yells across the room at him, "Shut up! We want to listen to the lady, not you!" Which worked. But I just couldn't imagine the nerve to ruin everyone's experience like that because you're too selfish to talk on the phone outside. Also, the place I work allowed photos but had a strict no photos of the staff rule for privacy reasons. I always explain this at the start and 99% of people are cool. One day I had a particularly happy snapper who got right up in a staff member's face to take a photo. Like I'm talking centimeters from his face to take this. The staffer was just some rando middle-aged white guy, so I'm not sure why the fascination, but he was livid. It's like I saw it happen in slow motion, so I couldn't do anything to stop it. The offending tourist was removed. I work ground crew for a company that does helicopter tours. Number 1 rule for customers is don't walk under the tail boom, the rotor will kill you and it will hurt. It's unbelievable how many people have a death wish out there. People see the fastest way to the other side of the helicopter and don't stop to think, oh hey, that spinning blade may or may not slice my whole frickin' head off. Let's see how close we can get to it. I'm a tour guide and boat captain in the Caribbean. We had about 40 or 50 people on the boat, getting off. We would normally go and feed swimming pigs, which someone would get nipped from them from doing stupid crap, but nothing too serious. Well, the next stop after that was another island where we would hand feed turtles, sharks, and stingrays. So we'd tell people to hold it with the palm open and food in the middle for the stingrays, and they'd come over the top and just remove it. For the turtles and sharks, you put it in the water holding onto the tips, and when they're coming, let it go. Well, of course, this idiot decided he'd be tough and feed this baby shark, no longer than your forearm, without letting go of the food. The shark proceeds to bite his fingers, he screams and jumps out of the water, and flicks it off with his hand, pulling off one of his fingernails in the process. That's the one I always remember. I used to give tours at my university. There was a group of middle schoolers I was giving a tour to show them why they should want to go to college, yada yada, and there was this one kid who kept trying to sneak away and was whistling at just about every girl who walked by. Weird. Okay, whatever, he thinks he's a big shot. Then a very attractive girl comes jogging by us and he tried to grab her. And then as she runs away, he just starts thrusting in her direction. I was mortified. I ended the tour, I was done with him. The teachers didn't even care. That was probably the worst part of it. Didn't happen to me per se, but one of the company's tour guides was on a flight with a bunch of middle schoolers. One of the boys got caught tickling his pickle in his seat next to a girl who wasn't even from his school. Ugh. Former whitewater rafting guide. There's a calmer section of the river where people can, if they choose to, hop out and swim through. They're wearing life jackets, so you can just float through it. This woman decides she wants to try it and hops out. After she pops up slowly, she tilts forward until just the back of her jacket is out of the water and she's completely still. After 5 or so seconds of this, I start to realize this might not be intentional, and I paddle over and physically pick her head up above the water, followed by her gasping for air. I haul her into the boat and ask what happened. She said she didn't know what to do as she had never been submerged in water before. Whew. 1. Why are you on a whitewater rafting trip? And 2. Why didn't your strategy involve moving your body? My cousin is a tour guide and biologist, and most of his tours are in Africa. He instructed his group of 20 to 25 people, including kids, not to wear any type of earring or collars, especially shiny stuff, since they're about to go into a thick forest to try and see a bunch of animals. This is very important because 20 to 25 make a lot of noise, which makes wild animals run away or hide. It's even worse if they're wearing shiny stuff because the animals can spot that from far away. So this woman complains and decides to wear shiny earrings anyway. Cousin tells her to get rid of them or she isn't coming with the group, so she obeys but puts them on a little bit later. Some species of monkey in that area love shiny stuff. They ripped the earrings from her ears. When did you realize that your paid professional was an absolute moron? I told my old therapist I didn't want to see her anymore, and she told me that without her I wouldn't even have any friends. When the roofer didn't bring a ladder. I ordered new windows to be installed in my attic, and the salesman who came to my house said that it'll be 6 weeks tops to get them in. 3 months later, they were delivered. When I spoke to the representative on the phone that I was unhappy about how much longer it actually took, and that their salesman had said 6 weeks, she said, "Oh, well, of course he said that. He's a salesman." My bankruptcy attorney was convinced that taxes paid had to be counted as income. Not gross pay, mind you. For example, gross pay is $1,000. $300 is taken for taxes, meaning you had a $700 check. He insisted this meant there was $1,300 in income to report. His reasoning was that there was an area later on the form to deduct taxes, and if we used the pre-tax number of $1,000, then after the deducted taxes it would only show a $700 income, which is clearly not the case since I made $1,000. Ugh. "Oh, was I not meant to do that? I didn't look at what you booked in for, I just assumed this is what you wanted," said a woman who is no longer my hairdresser. Well, mine marked the wrong wrist before surgery. The current position I have is by no means an entry-level one. When I was hired, I had to go through a rigorous 6-week training program. The first 2 weeks, though, our instructor was part of this other program where someone with much lower credentials is allowed to teach initial training to the much more experienced class in order to eventually be given a job at the position we were all training for. Makes sense, right? Anyways, anytime we had questions about anything, this instructor would say the words, "You're all getting too far ahead. We're going to talk about this next week." It took 2 days for us to figure out that our instructor didn't know the material and had no business attempting to teach us. I don't really understand this training program, but if you ask this junior instructor in the first 2 weeks something over his head, surely he's allowed to say that it's not something he's been trained in yet? Like, is this not something that's overseen if you have trainee trainers giving the class? I broke my arm and went to an orthopedic office. I didn't like them from the first appointment because I'd had an appointment and they made me wait 2 hours. Then they had their secretary take my past medical history, which is extremely complex, in the waiting room. On a follow-up appointment, the tech removed my cast. PA came in to assess my arm and went to my non-broken arm, assessed strength and range of motion and swelling, and told me it seemed to be healing nicely. I told her that's great since that one was never broken. Once she finished repeating the process on the arm that was actually broken, she sent the tech in to recast my arm. I had to stop the tech from casting my non-broken arm. On my appointment paperwork, she wrote that she recommended I take ibuprofen for pain relief. That was exactly like 2 sentences after where it stated, NSAIDs, like ibuprofen, cause life-threatening airway swelling for me. The same office wanted to charge me $50 every visit to sign a form that was literally one checkbox saying if I was cleared or not for full duty at work. One checkbox, no research required. I never went back. I figured out pretty quickly that I didn't like my driving instructor, but other people's horror stories about changing made me stick with him. 6 months of lessons being told off for minor errors and having the test dangled in front of me, but just out of reach, he finally said to me, "I just don't think you're going to be able to drive a manual car." He said this knowing full well that I'd already bought a manual car because I didn't expect to be learning for so long. He wrecked my confidence in driving, and it took me another 6 months to try again, and my new instructor had to then correct all the bad habits the first guy had taught me. He had no issue with my use of gears at all, and I passed first attempt. Screw you, Nick. A plumber in the middle of a job that had to drive back to the shop to get a part that was pretty basic, and then charged me for the time it took to do that, and then installed it incorrectly, and then returned a week later to fix the mistake and asked what idiot installed it that way, and then installed it wrong an entirely new way. Hey, some people like me, some don't. This was a boast from a doctor I saw when I injured my shoulder, and he said it was all in my head. I went to my GP to get a prescription for birth control. I suggested an IUD might be something I want because I'm very forgetful and pills didn't work out in the past. She refused to prescribe an IUD because I was a virgin and she didn't want to take my virginity away by inserting an IUD. I'm currently looking for a new GP, by the way. My car insurance company had an agent who reviewed my policy with me and while trying to get me to sign on to life insurance, wanted me to get an amount that would pay off my student loans and have my parents set for life. My parents. She refused to listen even when I told her nobody even co-signed my loans and that I have no contact with my financially comfortable, horrible, and healthy parents. I ended up writing a long email to the company, including wondering if they no longer wanted me as a customer. I took a job that sounded ideal on paper, but the CEO who I reported to gave off some very bad vibes very quickly. A lot of decisions he made were questionable at best. He wanted me to play clips from The Wolf of Wall Street to motivate the team, for example. But as soon as he told me he was altering people's targets midway through the month and withholding bonuses from certain team members, I was out of there. I was in the job for exactly 1 month, and on a Tuesday morning, I got into work and told him that I morally couldn't do it, and that if that was his decision, I didn't want to be part of it. 2 minutes later, I silently collected my things and left, feeling literally over the moon for doing so. I saw a doctor after a mental breakdown who told me I had anxiety, and then asked me if I'd tried not being anxious. I should specify that I only lost trust in this particular doctor. Once I changed doctors, I got a much better one. Although, to the other one's credit, while the comment wasn't helpful, they did recommend I see a psychiatrist. I dislocated my ankle and went to the hospital in an ambulance. When I got there, I was assessed and sent for X-ray. I got onto the bed and the tech started lining up the X-ray over my knee, so I told her I dislocated my ankle, not my knee, and she said that the chart said it was my knee. I replied that I'm pretty frickin' certain that the effed up foot that's hanging off is the problem, and that if she doesn't believe me, then to double check with the doctor because my knee is fine. She just kept repeating that if the chart says it's my knee, then that's what has to be X-rayed, and she's unwilling to double check. So, after a 2-hour wait for an X-ray, I went back to the doctor with pictures of my knee, and he was confused. So he goes to the X-ray tech and asks what the F she's playing at. She gives him the speech about how she just X-rays what it says on the chart. So he proceeds to chew her out, saying that if she's getting clearly conflicting information, then she has a duty to double-check to make sure she's doing the right thing. He said people make mistakes and this was an easy one to catch, but she's too much of a moron with no common sense to do anything about it. She was so angry at me as she took the X-ray of my ankle, saying I should have insisted she double-check, and I should have refused to do the X-ray until she did. That woman was completely incompetent. I was looking to hire an editor for one of my books last year. She corrected my grammar in the email I sent her, quite politely, I have to say. I think she thought it was some kind of audition piece, but she was just factually wrong about the mistake. I think it was the use of a colon instead of a semicolon. When I sent her a link to a couple of web pages that showed that actually the way I'd typed it was correct, she doubled down, got extremely snippy with me, and basically came back with, "You're hiring me to do a job, so I know better than you." I was like, "Which? I've done your job in the past. I know editing is a skill and deserves respect, but I'm paying you because I don't want to do it, not because I can't do it." There's nothing so hilarious as someone being confidently wrong, is there? For the record, even as a man who's been told that he writes well and has exhaustively Googled the topic, I feel a sense of anxiety when I write a semicolon, like I'm only mostly sure that I know what I'm doing with those specific little jerks. When I was a teenager in high school, I really wanted to apply for an astronomy camp program that summer, and you needed a letter of recommendation from a math or science teacher. My higher grade was in chemistry, so I asked her. She said she would, but be aware that she'd have to say I don't always focus on my work as I should. I said, fine, that was true. I worked really hard on the rest of the application and I got in. Ran to school in excitement to thank my teacher for her letter, and she couldn't hide her look of utter astonishment, and I realized what was up. A few months later, when at that camp, I nonchalantly asked the director, "She wrote me a bad letter, didn't she?" He immediately pulled me aside to say yes. It was so bad that it was a full page saying terrible things about my character and scholarship, so he knew to discount it, but wanted to let me know. Which was in fact good to know because I had an AP chemistry with her the next year and she kept doing stuff like that, getting me sent to the principal's office for a B- at the quarter. That still bothers me a bit to this day. I was your classic bright but bored kid and was obsessed with astronomy, and any educator worth their salt knows a kid who can't get good grades in chemistry class can thrive at a summer program. If she didn't want to write me a letter, one can just say no, but spending all that time writing a bad one? Pretty low thing to do to a kid. I'm actually an astronomer today, so screw her. And I'm still in touch with the camp director, and even work as a counselor some years when my schedule allows it. The same year I graduated, said teacher moved to New Jersey. I don't know where, and she had a very generic name, so no, I can't contact her or her employer, and I've no reason to believe that she isn't still teaching students today. Sad. My mom has always had amazingly manicured nails. She did them herself and they always looked perfect. I took her to many of her doctor's appointments as she got older and witnessed a nurse launch into her about the dangers of acrylic nails, especially for a diabetic like Mum. Mum told her, and I told her again and again, those aren't acrylic, they're just her nails. Yet she kept on telling Mum that she needed to get rid of the fake nails. I've never before witnessed such a stunning display of a complete failure to listen. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was planning a kitchen renovation in the apartment building I used to live in, and I had a plumber in to give advice and estimates. I lived on the ground floor of a 5-story complex. I wanted to relocate the sink, and doing so would take it from one side of a structural column to the other. It was a wooden building, and these internal columns were typically 6 2x6s nailed together. I was trying to come up with a clever way to reroute the plumbing, and this guy just grinned and said, "Just cut through it and don't tell anyone." I smiled, thanked him for his time, and don't let the door hit your butt on the way out, pal. I went to my therapist once and told her about my depression and how I didn't want to be alive anymore. I explained how I couldn't bring myself to do things, even small things I used to love doing, because I just couldn't be bothered to live. She suggested I was just lazy. I tried to defend myself, but ultimately I just agreed because she wouldn't listen to me. Flash forward another few months, I finally told her my story of being attacked by my father, after not having told anyone about it my entire life, and after one half-hour session she said I should just be over it and to stop talking about it and move on. About 20 years ago, I had a well-known nurse practitioner who was married to one of the doctors in the practice. I'd developed a weird combination of symptoms along with a silent strep infection. Anyway, she came in telling me about people she knew, giving first and last names and asking if I knew them, and telling me about their strep infections and symptoms and stuff. That was the last time I made an appointment with her. I knew it was straight up illegal to talk about other people's medical conditions, and it made me wonder who she told about mine. Horrible, horrible woman who thought she was untouchable because she was well off and married to a doctor. I have a relative who's a plumber. My sister's sink got messed up somehow and he came over, looked at it, went to the store down the street and got a $5 replacement part and fixed it for her. He told her that he would have charged an actual customer around $300 for what he fixed and would have stayed under the sink for more than 30 minutes pretending to be busy. I don't trust plumbers at all anymore. High school guidance counselor here. I was talking to her about what schools I was applying to. I said, so I'm looking at these state and city schools as my backups, but I'm mostly looking at this private school because they sent me… She scoffs, interrupting me. Honey, your family could never afford a private school. I pause and finish my sentence. A letter offering a full academic scholarship. You don't need shaded safety glasses, as I was staring into a 2,500-degree furnace. My professor said it's not her job to grade our papers correctly. You need a diet of 1,000 calories split into 5 small meals, no fat at all, and you need to do some video trainings with Male B, said a professional and certified sport dietitian whom I visited because I wanted to have a professional weightlifting training plan and diet. Stupid me actually tried to follow this diet for 3 months and stopped it after fainting several times during the day. This happened around the early 2010s in Poland. It turned out you don't need any certification to call yourself a dietitian here, or at least there was none back then. I was a petite girl who loves running, with no weight problems at all, and just wanted to find someone to introduce me to weightlifting. There were more red flags I skipped because I was young and naive, such as the dietitian office being in a shady part of town, and weird food restrictions like, you're only allowed 100 grams of meat per day. No eggs, no bread, no fruit at all. But if you need to make a cheat meal because you need to take your customers for a business lunch, then fine, eat whatever, but no carbs. Followed by some motivational bullcrap. I remember I lost about 3 kgs in my first week, and then the weight loss stopped. I regained 2 kilos back and was able to lose them again on a rational reduction diet made by an actual professional clinical dietitian I visited later. Oh gosh darn it. The narrator was aware that often nutritionists were full of crap and didn't need a qualification to call themselves such, but he kind of thought that dietitians were the ones that you could trust. Then again, this video is full of licensed medical professionals who are ignorant or just negligent as all hell, so maybe this is an example of a similarly qualified individual who was just bad at their job. Oh, the car salesman who said, you don't need to worry about these new diesel laws. We all drive diesels and it really won't change anything. 10 minutes later, he happened to slip in, oh, I drive an M3. I'd repeatedly gone to my GP about this nagging pain in my arm. He did some blood work to check for vitamin deficiency and sent me for an X-ray, which didn't show anything. He then decided my pain must be because I was an anxious female. On my last visit, I mentioned I'd also been struggling to breathe properly and had some chest pain and was starting to get quite concerned. He said, you're just anxious, but what do you have to be anxious about? You have a husband with a good job. And he sent me on my way with a prescription for Zoloft. 2 days later, I was in the ER being diagnosed with pulmonary embolism, and now I have a new doctor. At 17, I had a long history of migraines and then came down with a pretty severe vitamin D deficiency, which for some reason caused my migraines to come back after 4 years of having them under control. So I went with my mum to a neurologist. Our appointment was at 1:30 and my mum had a haircut appointment later at 5:30. So we get to the neurologist's office at 1 to fill out paperwork and stuff. We aren't called back until 4. When we get into the office, the doctor takes another 45 minutes to even show up. When he does, he isn't at all apologetic and starts saying that, based on my file, what I've been experiencing probably isn't migraines and they aren't a problem. Right off the bat, we could tell he's an arrogant jerk. After about 15 minutes of him questioning me and writing off my systems as a coincidence, what the frick, my mum says, look, we waited hours to see you and I've got other plans to get to tonight. Are you actually going to be helpful? To which the doctor responds by nagging my mum into telling him what other plans she has. She says a haircut. Listen, woman, what's more important, your hair or your son's life? Considering the fact that he'd been completely disregarding everything that I was telling him about my headaches, it was apparent that my life didn't matter to him. Needless to say, we won't be going back to him again. A religious professional therapist once told me that the only reason I was depressed is because God was disappointed in me. Oh, thanks, man. I was going to self-delete last night, but I'm really glad I didn't so I could hear you say that. If you go on birth control and give up Johnnies, you'll become immune to pregnancy. Also, going to church will help treat your condition, said a pretty expensive OBGYN. When I was 23, I was hospitalized for an episode of acute pancreatitis. My doctor at the time was convinced I was an alcoholic. At the hospital, he asked me to tell him about my drinking. I told him I didn't drink, because I didn't. I was always the designated driver, I don't like drinking or feeling drunk. He sent my parents and grandparents away and then said, "Now you can tell me the truth. How much are you drinking?" I repeated the above. I don't drink. He got frustrated and left. The next few appointments, when I offered up explanations for why I was getting pancreatitis, he belittled them and refused to listen to me or investigate further. When I asked how I could prevent another episode, he told me to eat carbs and stop drinking. No matter what I said, his solution was that I just needed to stop drinking. A year later, I was hospitalized again for another episode of pancreatitis. This time, I was in another city. I told the doctor that my family has a history of cystic fibrosis, that my uncle and multiple cousins have cystic fibrosis, and pointed out the link between pancreatitis and cystic fibrosis. This doctor, unlike the first, listened to me and tested my DNA for CF markers. Guess why I got pancreatitis? I have the CF markers in my DNA and multiple CFTR-related conditions. Take that, idiot. I don't drink. I was frickin' right. I never saw the first doctor again, and I got everyone else in my family to see someone else as well. I took my kids to a local optician for years. I queried a few times with them about glasses as I felt they couldn't see very well as they were getting older. Some glasses were given, but they were only to wear them if they absolutely had to. So cue my kids not really wearing them at all. The advice was that this would strengthen their eyes and hopefully reverse their short-sightedness. I took them to the races. They couldn't see a thing, what horses were running, the boards with the winner placings on them, so I took them straight to a new optician who immediately gave them glasses and contact lenses for permanent use and who was horrified with the old optician's advice. Apparently your eyes get worse if you don't wear glasses when you're short-sighted, not better. I still don't understand how they were managing at school. My father had just passed away after deciding he didn't want to be alive anymore. I was 14. I really struggled to get through a full week of school. My attendance was pretty shocking. My psychiatrist said to my mum, "Don't worry, she doesn't need an education. She's pretty." This fueled my mum to get me right back into school. I frickin' love my mum. When a career motivator had a chat with me asking about what I wanted to do for the future, by the way, I was 18 and about to apply for uni, I said, mechanical engineering. But I didn't hold on the it was just like the natural you fit into any sentence. He then said in the most overconfident, condescending manner, "Nope, you stuttered, therefore you're not sure and this is not a career for you. Look elsewhere, son." Oh, gee, thanks, mystical man. I'ma just drop my plans for the next 40 years of my life over a stutter. By the way, I just made it into my dream uni for a mechanical engineering degree, so screw you, you basic YouTube motivation channel copycat hack. Veterinary clinic. "So, what's wrong with your cat?" I was holding a rabbit. Her face got really red afterwards. It was just most likely a brain toot. As an out for her, my wife had tried buying cat litter and cat food for the rabbit, until I reminded my wife that we had a rabbit. Maybe my rabbit just looks like a cat. I asked a doctor about medicine for a condition and she told me all about the power of faith and how it's so helpful to her. Last visit. Look, faith is an incredibly important part of people's lives and I have no problem with it, but when I'm paying for a doctor's visit, I want some gosh darn doctoring, with actual science and stuff. A dermatologist once told me that my psoriasis would go away if I dumped my girlfriend and quit my job. That isn't really an answer and it makes sense what the follow-up was. He prescribed me shampoo to fix my feet. He then argued with me about where my psoriasis was presenting. It was on my hands and feet, yet he insisted it was on my head under my hair. I am a bald man. When did you see an awesome mic drop moment in court? I had a client who was accused of taking a young woman's car and then crashing it and fleeing the scene. The girl testified at trial that she'd given him the keys that night because she was drunk and would never, ever drink and drive. Apparently she wasn't aware that I'd requested and obtained a copy of her driving record, which showed she had received a DUI a month after the incident. I still remember the look on her face when I handed her her driving record and said, "Except for that one time you got caught a month later, right?" The look on the judge's face was equally memorable. I can't remember exactly what he called her testimony, something along the line of absolutely not believable. There were quite a few other evidentiary issues that pointed to the possibility that someone else, perhaps an inebriated young woman, was driving the vehicle at the time of the accident. The client was acquitted. I trapped a defendant pretty badly one time. He testified in a deposition that he had a green arrow for his left turn and that my client ran the red. Unfortunately for him, the additional turn lane arrow was installed 2 months after the wreck. Case settled for policy limits a week later. During a deposition on a case where 2 former employees decided to start their very own company in a very niche market, The problem was how they did it, which was trying to poach existing clients while they were still employed with their old boss, which breached their fiduciary duty, particularly that of loyalty. I believe we also went after them for intentional interference with contract, as they weren't trying to solicit new clients for their business, but rather trying to get existing ones to break their contracts with our clients. They were dumb enough to make their plans on company laptops they later unsuccessfully tried to brick. Using the company laptop to try and do it just made it way easier to catch them when the company IT guy found all the emails. One of the defendants was the one being deposed. She said she answered to a higher power than the company. When I pressed her on what that meant, she said, myself. That got reused prominently at trial. I was reviewing the transcript of an interview with the child. The child made incriminating statements against my client. At one point, when discussing the allegations, the child used an odd word, but I didn't think too much of it. Then a few days later, I was watching a video of the child interacting with their grandmother, who hates my client, from about a week before that interview. The grandmother used the exact same odd word in the exact context the child later used it. At that moment, it became clear that child had been coached. It was the first real, aha! moment of my career. Yes, I was about to say that I'm imagining the iconic Phoenix Wright pose for the majority of these stories. Let's see what other juicy evidence dumps we have in store. I worked on a case involving defective processors. They were in an Asian country, but the emails were all in English because they were going to US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault, and finishing it with, "This is a big problem. We ship crap to customer." Needless to say, we hit them over the head with that in mediation, and they settled shortly after. My client has been keeping her son away from the father because the father has a new child. She's concerned that her son will act violently towards the new child and she could be held liable. The judge said, "That's not even a defense." I was in small claims court. My lease had an exit clause that said if I fronted 2 months' rent, they would work to lease my place and return anything unused. I checked with the office ahead of time. They ensured me that there was a waiting list, so I gave them the 2 months and moved. They never returned a dime. I talked to the new tenant and confirmed they moved in a week later. In court, the judge was commenting on how he didn't see anything explicitly saying they'd return any unused rent, even though that intent was stated to me a few times. Dumbo from the leasing office piped in with, "Your Honor, in almost every case we can return some money, but in this case we didn't have a tenant in the 2 months after he left." So, she gave the case back to me and I presented the affidavit from the new tenant confirming the move-in date. Judge awarded me double the amount that they owed. Turned out, leasing office Dumbos 1 and 2 thought they could lie to me and return my excess rent money to themselves. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing a mom in a petition for a restraining order against the boyfriend/dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody, support, a few other things, but today's hearing was just on the restraining order. We had pretty good facts, but it was mostly based on testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as witnesses go, so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client shows up. I give her a last-minute prep on what to expect, and then she says, "I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore, and he's just getting worse. To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday." I paused a moment. Do you have your phone with you?" "Yes." We play the voicemail and it's a full 2 minutes of ex-boyfriend screaming crap like, "I should have frickin' killed you when we were together. You were always such a B-word. I hope you burn to death in a fire." I didn't have time to ask her why the F she hadn't said anything to me about the voicemail before the bailiff called our case. We sit, the judge asks if either side has additional evidence, and I ask for permission to play the voicemail. Ex-boyfriend, who didn't have an attorney, didn't object, so I played the whole nasty 2-minute rant in open court. The judge goes, "We're going to take a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confer in the hall, they're welcome to." The boyfriend knew he was screwed. We settled the whole damn case then and there. My client got her wish list in terms of custody, supervised visitation, child support, plus the restraining order to boot. I'm a trial lawyer. I have a ton of these. My favorite was probably a DUI where the cop was in Buffalo Wild Wings with my client watching a fight. Like the cop was standing at the bar in full uniform, then when my client walked by him to leave, followed him out. The client was only actually going to his car to grab his phone charger because he was going home with the bartender. Like he hadn't even closed his tab yet. The cop arrested him and charged him with DUI for opening his car door, then fabricated the story for his report about how the client got in the car, turned it on, and began to pull out of the space to leave the parking lot. He also denied being inside the Buffalo Wild Wings, on the stand, under oath, to my face. Surprise, I talked to the bartender at the wings joint and got the security tape. It very clearly, like surprisingly good quality, don't try to steal from a Buffalo Wild Wings by the way, showed the cop standing at the bar, watching my client walk out the front door, then follow him 30 seconds later. The parking lot cam also showed the client barely touched the door handle before the cop stopped him. I'll add, the cop underwent an internal review where the board determined he hadn't done anything wrong. Then a few months ago, he killed an unarmed man while on patrol. He also trains new cops now and tells young college girls he pulls over to call him Tommy. My moment was when I compared the scanned copy of the deed provided by the other side's lawyers to the original my client eventually got around to providing. The scanned copy provided by the other side had a witness signature. The original did not. You know, it's been a while since the narrator provided his usual quote that can honestly be the moral lesson of any video that contains a certain amount of tenant-landlord disputes. Keep every bit of potential evidence from your tenancy. You never know when you'll need them. Years ago, I had to do something at a strip mall in a bad part of town. It took me about 20 minutes and then I found that my car had been towed. Ubered to the tow yard, a giant sign says cash only. I had to call another Uber, drive to the ATM and back and pay them $300. Got a crappy handwritten receipt that, believe it or not, was itemized. I went home, Googled, found that they violated the law in 3 separate ways. They towed illegally refused to accept credit cards, and had multiple charges that the law called unreasonable, like dolly fees and load and unload fees. I took them to small claims court. The judge began by asking the tow yard owner about his relationship with the property owner and how the decision was made to tow my car. "Oh," the slimy tow truck guy answered, "my cousin works there. If he says I tow, I tow. It's 100% legal." The judge's eyebrows began to rise. "But," the guy continued, "but what I detest the most, Your Honor, is this jerk claiming I don't take credit cards. I'm a businessman. I take credit cards all the time. He's a lowlife that doesn't have any credit cards. That's why he wanted to pay cash." I was having a "hold it" overload, and the judge saw me smiling and hopping in my seat and putting my manila folder of receipts on the table. "Do you actually not have any credit or debit cards?" the judge asked me. I pulled out my wallet and showed him, and then I pulled out a time-stamped photo of the cash-only sign I took the day of and another one I took the morning of the hearing. The guy mumbled something like, "Okay, you got me there," and then had nothing but, I didn't know that," when the judge asked him about the legality of each unreasonable itemized charge. Anyway, each violation pays double the tow charge, and since there were 3, that's how I made $1,800 on a $300 investment. My client was accused of brutally murdering a dog. A cop testified that there was no testing of the blood, no body ever found, and admitted that it could have in fact run away. The eyewitness said she could see the killing down the hallway from the dining room. The cop testified there was no hallway and the dining room was on a different level of the house than the killing supposedly took place in. Then the person who was leading the lynch mob against my client around town for the last year testified that she had been in the apartment between the 2 visits by the cop to evaluate the scene. No body, a compromised crime scene, witness who couldn't see anything, and admission that there was no proof the dog was dead. Closing argument lasted 3 seconds. Your Honor, I'm asking for an acquittal. My mum hit a guy on her bike with her car in a parking lot. She claimed he hit her, she also wanted to countersue the cyclist for scaring her, and in her deposition she started every sentence with, "Well, when I hit him, Mum." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A friend of mine was a DWI attorney in New York for a while. He was defending a guy who was asleep in the back seat of his car while intoxicated, and a New York State trooper arrested him. On the stand, the trooper testified that he visually saw the key in the ignition. My friend gave him like 3 chances to walk it back. "Are you sure, trooper, that you actually saw the key in the ignition?" "Yes, counselor." When a cop calls a lawyer counselor, he really means butthole. And then my buddy dropped the hammer. "You are aware that my client drives a Toyota Prius. They use fobs to start the car, not keys." Bam. We had no evidence that the woman who slammed into my stopped car going 85 miles per hour was drunk until she indignantly admitted it on tape in her deposition. She busted into my deposition and demanded she go first because I was a lying B-word. She excitedly told my lawyer that the police report was wrong because it said she was coming from the movie theater when she was actually coming from her friend's bar. Did you have anything to drink at your friend's bar? Of course. How many drinks? I don't know, they just keep my glass full. Did you take any medication that day? Methadone and low blood pressure medicine. I see. The cops had refused to have her breathalyzed at the scene because her husband was a firefighter that they knew personally. They just told her to go home, sober up, and go to the hospital later. I heard the whole thing but had no proof until she handed it to me. They settled same day. One of my friends got hit by a car when crossing the street at a crosswalk on foot. This was back when we were in high school. The guy tried to sue him for the damages to his car. At one point, the lawyer called up my friend's mum and asked her for the son's insurance information and pictures of the damage of her son's car. She explained that my friend was on foot and the lawyer just went silent for a bit. He said, "I need to speak with my client," and hung up. He called back a few minutes later and told her that she wouldn't be hearing about this again. I clerk for a judge and we had a low-level thief in our courtroom who had robbed one of his neighbor's houses in the winter in Colorado, and all the police had to do was follow the footsteps back to his house, where he was hanging out with the stolen items and a small amount of substances and a broken gat. Idiot. This is why there are so few domestic burglaries in the Nordic countries. It's nothing to do with the fact that they're better behaved up there. There's just a frickin' trail in the making between any two given points that someone could conceivably rob and or hide in. I got a hidden shout-out from a federal judge in a ruling that I considered to be one of the highest points of my career. Here's what happened. Before a hearing for an emergency injunction against the USDA, I was watching the hearing before mine, a trademark infringement case. At the end of that hearing, the judge accidentally used a pun and couldn't stop laughing. She was literally crying. I decided at that moment I was going to intentionally use a pun in my hearing. I did. I accused USDA of engaging in a shell game by illegally diverting some federal funds to an egg industry trade group. The judge called me out on it but laughed heartily. My client won. The judge threatened to put the Secretary of Agriculture in jail. A major newspaper reporting on the case said the judge winced at my puns but agreed with my arguments. False. When the written ruling was issued, the last sentence said that an injunction was issued against the USDA's use of funds for any plans they may have been hatching. Undeniable shout-out. Oh, so this is my mum's story. She was fighting for custody on behalf of a father, trying to prove that the kids were living in subpar conditions with their substance-addicted mother in spite of the ample child support provided. It was a tough case because courts are so hesitant to pull kids away from their mums. Then the mum burst out that she had been feeding the kids cat food as proof that she wouldn't let them starve. Needless to say, the judge didn't take that as a good reason for the kids to stay with their mum. I tried to sell my home myself, and the buyers wanted a term period for land contract before getting their own mortgage. I agreed to 1 year, had a simple contract drawn up, and after, we both signed it and everything seemed fine. Within 30 days, they presented me with their own legally drawn-up land contract that was pages long to, quote, protect their investment. About page 3, it very clearly stated that, if for any reason the home burns down, the purchaser will receive all insurance proceeds. First, I still had a mortgage and the proceeds would legally go to pay that off. Second, that's a pretty targeted thing to say. Not lawyers' terms of the house being destroyed, and it's surrounded by woods and waterways, just if it burnt down. Page 4 stated that this would remain a land contract until my mortgage was paid in full, so they'd never buy outright. I returned it to them with a letter stating these two things were never happening and I wasn't signing. They stopped paying, so I began eviction. 6 months later, the lawyer I hired was an idiot and I was sitting down with their lawyer myself. He brings out the contract that they'd tried giving me and began talking about their ironclad case due to the agreement. I asked him to show me my signature. The look on his face when he realized it wasn't on there. After we talked, it turned out that he knew them and wrote the contract without the burn the house down stipulation. It seems they added that, and under the belief it was a long-term land contract. Not only did I win, I'm pretty sure they lost a lawyer friend in the process. I represented myself in court. I got a parking ticket and contested it due to misleading signs. Took a bunch of pictures and brought them to court. The judge agreed and dismissed the case. Hold up, what about the towing fees? I asked, as he was about to read the next case. I got those back too. I'm currently in a custody battle. Mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because therapy must have both parents' consent, and the mother has retracted consent. Okay, this is very abbreviated, but I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl, who regularly came to the store, back to a part of the store for sinister purposes – child enticement. It was the only section of the store without surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds, per the timestamp on the videos. Of the many arguments the defense put on, one was that there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen. In my rebuttal on closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in the room in that amount of time, and I asked them to close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch, in silence. After about 60 seconds, 2 of the jurors started crying. I knew it was going to be guilty right then. My client was riding his motorcycle in a relatively calm street when this guy exited his garage, without looking, and ran over him. In deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him on the passenger seat. The whole time, the witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the fourth telling, he was already a bit frustrated and let it slip. Look, I've already told you, we were exiting the garage, and as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell phone on the car's carpet, wait, so you didn't see the crash? There was no coming back from that. I knew the cops beat up my client and framed him. They described a knife in his possession that caused them to fear for their safety. Oddly, they never seized it. We won the criminal case and filed the civil rights case. While deposing one of them, he described the knife in detail. No more than 3 minutes later, he slipped up and claimed his partner told him my guy had a knife, but he never saw it himself. I told him, "That's not what you just said," and I saw him panic. His lawyer panicked too and asked to see me outside. When we got in the hallway, I withdrew my settlement demand and the case settled for a substantially larger amount within 45 minutes. Man, there are a lot of stories of power-mad cops here, aren't there? And from follow-up stories, it seems like guys like this are rarely held accountable beyond a, quote, investigation into their conduct that simply makes them more careful in choosing their victims next time. The plaintiff was being deposed in the lawsuit she filed alleging gender-based discrimination. She was claiming her boss had made some inappropriate innuendos and overtures. The defense attorney asked her when the alleged statements or events took place. Was she shocked? No. Was she offended? No. Was she damaged in any way? No. So why exactly are we here? Well, honestly, I'd rather not be. Meanwhile, her attorney stared straight down, scribbling notes and doodling. We ended the deposition there and asked her attorney if this was going away now. We got a call later offering to settle for $1,000 and a letter of apology. My best guess is that she was pressured by a friend or family to talk to an attorney, and the lawyers ran with it without really talking to their client. So I filed this lawsuit in January. We exchanged discovery, where each side sends questionnaires and gets carefully worded answers, over the next few months, and then I filed a motion for summary judgment, meaning I'm asking the court to let me win the case without a jury because the case is so obvious. Right before I file this motion, I figure let's review the discovery materials and see if there's anything I've missed. And what do you know, the other side made a massive mistake on literally just the 4th out of the 100 questions that I asked. It's a dog bite case, and every single time I asked about the bite, the response says something along the lines of, "We admit to this and that, but we deny that our dog was involved in any dog attack." Well, question 4 asks whether they admit that their dog was not leashed on the day when it bit my client, and they simply answer, admit, meaning they admit their dog wasn't leashed, and they admit that their dog was the one that bit my client. That was the one thing that was genuinely in dispute. They tried to argue at the hearing that it was a mistake and they only meant to admit the lack of a leash, but the judge held them to their word, most likely because the other evidence made it clear that it could only have been their dog anyway. My attorney had this moment in my initial consultation with him for my boating while intoxicated charge. Yes, boating. BUI. The sheriff's department conducted the field sobriety tests on the deck of their small vessel in a heavily traveled waterway rather than taking me to dry land. The charges were thrown immediately out after my attorney brought this to the attention of the DA. Parent termination case I was prosecuting in. The dad went on about how he had changed his life around and worked the AA program. I asked him what step he was on, and he proudly proclaimed Step 3. I asked him what Step 3 is, and he had no idea. Then I asked him Step 2. Again, no idea. Parental rights terminated. When did you have to deal with a ridiculous compulsive liar? Oh boy, in middle school I had a friend who claimed he had a special-made Nintendo 64 that supported 8 players. We asked if we could all come over and play, and he made up excuses. The tenants at the place where I work lie about things they do all the time and stick by their story even if you have all the evidence in the world to the contrary. Like these really trashy people we had. Their apartment looked like an episode of Hoarders. They were throwing trash out their windows, like it took me several trips with a large trash can to get all of it. Of course, they said it's not them, it must be the neighbors. Well, A, their neighbors have been out of town for weeks, B, the trash was in a big pile under their windows, not their neighbors', and C, we found multiple pieces of mail with their names and addresses on them, their old driver's license and their old library cards in the pile of trash as well. They still denied doing it. I've probably got dozens of lying tenant stories. One set lied about everything, but most couldn't be proven wrong. One spring we had 3 straight days of steady rain flooding many buildings in low-lying areas, as well as basements everywhere. This tenant called me to tell me several TVs and other electronic devices she'd stored in the basement were ruined due to water that was a foot deep down there. By the time I got there, the water had receded and the floor was only damp. She swore the water was almost to her knees and wanted my insurance to cover her losses. I had her bend down with me in front of the natural gas furnace and asked her what she saw. She was quiet when she realized that the pilot light was still burning, about an inch off the ground. Some kid my little cousin was dating said he was a Marine platoon sergeant whose convoy was once blown up and he was the only survivor, so he was discharged and given a Purple Heart and has PTSD. He was 16 at the time. A girl in my high school really blew me away with the things she thought we'd believe. My favorite was probably the story about the time that a cop cornered her and told her to put her hands against the wall. Lucky for her, it was one of those secret spinning walls like in the movies, so she ran down the secret passage and got away. I was about to say, you should be more careful about immediately dismissing people's testimony about police abusing their power against women. Then we got the Indiana Jones wall bit, and I went, okay, maybe you can dismiss that story. This woman I work with spouts off 100 pointless lies a day about her life. I can only guess because she thrives on excitement and attention, because all you can really do is roll your eyes at the crap she says. Like she said she got a $3,000 check from a lawsuit against Red Bull, that her tires are warranted for 150,000 miles because her friend works at a mechanic shop, and that her landlady gives her free rent all the time because she loves her so very much. Even one time she told me that she bought $500 worth of wacky tobacco and that it was rainbow-colored from Jamaica. Then the next day she said ants got in the bag and ate it all. The funniest part is no one's asking her about this stuff. She's just going up to everyone throughout the day and telling them all about it to make sure you heard her story. I went to school with a girl who told the most unbelievable and dramatic lies. She told people she was a Victoria's Secret model, that she owned a restaurant in Chicago, owned a color iPod mini in every color to match her outfits. I had to room with her for the DC trip. I'd just moved there and didn't know anyone. And we all got in an extremely dramatic fight that ended with her building a bed out of chairs in the bathroom and calling security. She was something. Oh, and because I really think it's funny, one time she told me she was a professional singer and that she was recording an album. Then she leaned over like she was going to tell me a secret and sang my name into my ear. Yes! Once I had a friend in high school who was constantly lying about things. There's quite a few examples, but one situation stands out to me the most. She'd been talking on and off about her parents getting divorced, which I actually thought might have been true. She said that her dad was already seeing someone else, that they'd moved into this fancy subdivision area, and that she hated her new stepmom. Now, it all seemed to have happened quickly, but it didn't seem that weird, until I spent the night at her house. When I got there, what I knew to be her dad's car was in the driveway. I said, "Is that your dad's car?" And she said, "Oh wow, he's so bold, why would he just come here?" So we headed inside. I was feeling like the next few minutes were going to be awkward, so I just headed to her room. But I can still hear everything in her living room. Here's the exact scene. My friend yelling, "What is your deal? You call yourself a dad? You can't just show up whenever you please and then go to your other—" Dad interrupting in a very confused tone, "What are you talking about?" Her mum joins in, "Honey, what's going on?" "Go to your other family, and Mom, I can't believe you're allowing this. Leave, Dad, leave!" My friend storms down the hallway to her room where I am. As she reaches the door, she says, "I'm so sorry about that. I'm just sick of him showing up when he pleases." Meanwhile, we can still hear her parents in the living room. Dad says, Okay, seriously, what was that? Mum says, just another day with Elsie, I guess. I felt so awkward that I didn't even question her about it. I had a friend in middle school who went to a different high school. We still Skyped every so often, and he told me about his good fortune at his new high school. Top of the class, 34 on the ACT, has a girlfriend named Jane. So, flash forward to college, I end up in the same class as some girl who went to the same high school as this friend did. I ask her if she knows him. She says he stalked her in high school and wouldn't leave her alone. Her name? Jane. I've since wondered if anything he told me was true. I like that he got a 34 on the ACT. Isn't the best score 36? You've got to draw the line somewhere, I guess. A person at my school told me that when he used to live in Scotland, he had 7 girlfriends at the same time. Another person told me that the area he used to live in was a rough area and that he was shot while living there. Then, when asked to see the wound, he said he forgot where he was shot. Co-worker at Papa John's when I worked there said that he had a black belt in Aikido because he took 2 classes and then beat the teacher, and the teacher was so impressed that he awarded him his belt, then flew a fighter jet and had PTSD from seeing combat, he wouldn't specify what location, that he had several girlfriends in different locations that he frequently traveled to, or that he hadn't dated anyone except that one perfect girl who cheated on him with a substance addict, that he was an expert hacker, that he'd been kidnapped by the mob in New York that one time, and wouldn't elaborate further. There was a bunch more, but these are the only ones I really remember. They were all ridiculous. He'd get really vague or start making up conflicting details when he was pressed. Keep in mind, this guy was like 19 to 20 and was very nerdy/scrawny, the kind of thin that you get from sitting around doing nothing, not working out or being in the military or whatever. A guy in high school would tell us all about how he was super mechanically inclined and worked on motorbikes and cars. He was so good that the owner of the shop that he supposedly worked at gave him some old beat-up muscle car that was so broken that no one could fix it. He got it working and restored, but apparently it was too nice to drive to school. His boss took such a liking to him that he let him move into one of the many houses he owned. The house had a pool, and he and his friends would take turns jumping into the pool from the roof. Apparently, his boss also encouraged him to date his daughter, who promptly moved in with him. After only 2 weeks, he proposed after he took her out in a canoe filled with roses and got her a Tiffany engagement ring, all purchased with his mechanic job. We were 16, by the way. A girl I went to school with told people that her aunt married a snake. I'll never forget that. I also have an ex who would vehemently deny she was cheating. I could have caught her in the act and she'd still try to convince me that she didn't do it. I now refer to her as Shaggy. A friend of mine got lucky after bragging to a girl about being an underwater firefighter. Our other friend backed him up by saying that he was an underwater welder and he had his life saved multiple times by said friend. I mean, these are both actual jobs that exist, but if anything, that wingman move kind of removes any credibility they have. Because underwater firefighters get called in for major problems, they don't just sit next to underwater welders on the off chance that one of them has an accident. In any case, more of a weird pickup than a proven compulsive liar. Was in a gaming clan once where some guy was always trying to one-up people in terms of getting all the attention in the channel. We'd talk about the boxes of Titan X GPUs at his house, or that Nvidia was working on new graphics cards that only he knew about. Then he was a pro game developer that worked on all of this stuff, and he had all of these connections in the industry despite living in the middle of West Virginia. Then he tried telling people that he had terminal illness and was going to die in a month, but people knew him in real life, and yeah. I left the group since then, so it's been a year and a half since I've heard from anyone, but his name alone used to be a running joke for telling BS stories. My friend in 3rd grade informed me that she was pregnant, and it was for that reason that her belly was sticking out. I told her that you have to have whoopee to get pregnant. She said, "Not always." She always told me that the Backstreet Boys were her cousins. I grilled her on Backstreet Boy trivia, literally just asking if she knew their names, and she couldn't answer any of it. The idea that she thought all of the Backstreet Boys were related is hilarious to me. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. So, there's this guy named Michael. Michael is, as near as anyone can tell, a pathological liar. He's one of those fellows who has to trump everyone's story with one of his own, and somehow, He always winds up being an insanely attractive action hero in these stories. I've heard Michael talk about how he was issued access to a fighter jet at age 17, how he once saved the president from some plot or another, and how he had an impromptu ménage à trois with some very famous celebrity and her sister in the Sacramento River. Suffice to say, the guy isn't exactly believable, but perhaps his worst lie was one that took an entire evening to tell. In the town where I grew up, there used to be a weekly event called the Chef's Market. Since there wasn't a whole lot else to do in the area, my friends and I would frequently spend our Friday evenings there, wasting what little money we had on slabs of barbecued meat and cups of too sweet lemonade. On one such occasion, a local party coordinator had set up an inflatable stage of sorts, on which two contestants were encouraged to knock each other off low platforms using weapons that looked like rather enormous Q-tips. It seemed like a lot of fun, so I offered to pay for any of my friends who wanted to spar against me. "Oh, I can't," Michael chimed in before anyone else could talk. "It's okay," I said. "I'll pay for you if you want." Truth be told, I was hoping he'd decline so that I could pay for one of my other friends to try it with me. Fortunately, that's exactly what happened. Michael shook his head. "No, I'm very opposed to violence unless it's absolutely necessary." "This isn't violence," one of my other friends said. "It's just fun." "You guys don't understand," protested Michael. "If I go in that ring with you, I will kill you. I won't have a choice." A few eye rolls were passed around the group. "Why's that, Michael?" someone asked. "It's by trading," he said. "Once I get into a combat state, I can't stop until I've killed someone." Now, Michael was clearly not someone that we spent much time around by choice, and none of us were too keen on talking him into an activity that he was clearly afraid of trying. My other friends and I went a few rounds, knocked each other down a few times, and figured we'd head off to find a drink. As soon as we started walking, though, Michael started into the next leg of his story. "Do you guys know why I have that trading?" he asked. "Because you're a ninja?" someone sarcastically replied. Michael nodded. "Yes, I was trained kung fu from a very young age, and I got so good that my family got run out of the last town where we lived." Nobody said anything. We certainly didn't ask him to continue, but he did anyway. "They even hatched a plot to try and get me thrown into prison. This girl broke into my house one night and tried to seduce me, but I already had a girlfriend, so I turned her away. That's when she went to the police and tried to say that I'd committed the unspeakable act on her." "How terrible," someone muttered. "Don't encourage him," hissed someone else. Michael's voice took on a very grave aspect. "Fortunately, I was friends with the owner of the hospital. He helped me after I accidentally killed my karate teacher." Someone made a comment about the difference between karate and kung fu, but Michael either didn't hear them or pressed onward anyway. "He tested the girl himself, and he found the genetic material in her hoo-ha, but it wasn't mine, and it wasn't human." He waited for a reaction. When it didn't come, he escalated even further. "That started a rumor that I was a genetically engineered super soldier because of how powerful I am. We had to leave town for my parents' safety because I couldn't always be there to protect him." Once again, nobody said anything save for a few murmurs of, yeah. Thankfully, Michael seemed to have exhausted himself for the evening until he asked one of us to pay for his dinner. No one was really surprised when he had a really insane reason for being broke. In short, a genetically engineered super soldier had to flee with his parents after being accused of both the unspeakable act and murder. And that's why he needs you to pay for his burrito. I used to work in restaurants years ago with a girl that insisted that in order to cure her brother of his fear of cats, the doctor tied him to a fence and threw cats at him until he was cured. She was like 25 and seriously thought that we all believed her. She was entertaining, to say the least, and while she drove us crazy with her stories, I do occasionally miss listening to them. My little sister had a friend in elementary school that said she had an underground pool with 100 dolphins living in it. The sister was angry when I called the girl a compulsive liar. My sister didn't draw the line until the friend said she had a cell phone. Apparently that one was unbelievable. This was in the mid-90s, by the way. I know a guy, I'll call him Phil because that's his name. He's 5'8", 280 pounds, runs the quarter mile in 8.2 seconds, bench presses 610 pounds with his bare hands, and has bowled over 3,000 perfect games in a row, so that's what we know about him so far. He was a SEAL Ranger for over 15 years, but had to leave the army because he was just too deadly, apparently, so he became a ninja until the US called him back down to hunt down Noriega. His hands are registered deadly weapons, and he'll be killed by the FDA if he ever reveals who he really is. He once went to Universal Studios to see the Conan the Barbarian show and almost didn't make it back because they thought he was the perfect Conan, but he had to turn it down because he was going to be the next senior project manager at work. He showed me a framed picture of him as Conan, or rather him as Arnold Schwarzenegger as Conan. Oh, and that bottom right-hand corner under the picture wasn't a page number, that's how much they offered him, but without the 12 zeros. Wow, Phil sure seems like a cool, rad person who's achieved a lot. No way that any of that is bullcrap. What the hell? I love being so committed that you try to pass off a page number as literally anything else. Do compulsive liars actually think that other people are this gullible? I can understand having a compulsion to just say stuff like this, but does it also make you think everyone else is a complete drooling idiot who can't tell fact from fiction? Used to have a friend who was a pathological liar by every sense of the word. Some of his highlights include being the heir to a large corporate fortune. He said his grandmother owned a VIP box at a large commercial sports venue, that he was a personal friend of Hillary Clinton, graduated with honors from a prestigious university, which in reality he attended one semester, that he was a high-ranking employee of several political campaigns. Gloria Allred was apparently his personal lawyer. Mother was a founding member of AITA. Sister was a backup dancer for Lady Gaga. He receives a monthly special benefit from the state for being adopted. I'm 99% sure this was an EBT card, which somehow we're the heir to a large corporate fortune as well. Mother graduated Harvard Law with and is a close friend of Justice Kagan. Mind you, this is just the crap I can confirm is false. There's a much longer list of things that I'm pretty sure are false, as well as things that would be too identifying to share. Oh, I had this one friend in college. Most of his tales were these ridiculous cinematic conquests, sounding like something straight out of a badly written adult film, all of which had apparently taken place since he entered college 3 years ago. Ménage à trois with hot cheerleaders, doing the deed with a hot, older professor, doing it in public, the list just went on like that. It was obvious he took all the things that he liked in adult movies and just made up stories involving himself, and he'd only tell these stories in public because he wanted random people to hear it. Met a guy who claimed that at age 14 he worked at medieval times and was one of the knights. He claimed he was the youngest knight in the history of medieval times, and that one day when he was walking from his car wearing a full suit of armor, because apparently they let you take it home, he got struck by lightning. I was in the Navy, so I had a ton of these. Tons and tons and tons and tons. But the first guy was the one that really stole my heart. We were in boot camp together, and I don't remember his name. Jake, maybe? I don't know. He was from Iowa, where his parents were apparently millionaires because in his small town they were accountants. To all the billionaires in town. Their small Iowa town had quite a few billionaires, apparently. That's how he got money, too. He owned a dozen cars and he had 30 weapons in his collection. When he chose to join the Navy as an undesignated enlisted, he got that hookup from his uncle, who was a senator. Former senator. He spent all of his summers growing up with this guy. But this guy had died the previous year and had already forgotten his name, I guess. But they were apparently really close. That's why he got in as an undesignated seaman. Also, his other uncle, I think, was an admiral. The nukes wanted him, what with his perfect 99 on the ASVAB, and so did the SEALs. He had apparently used to train with a bunch of them, in Iowa. But his uncle got him the hookup as an undesignated seaman, so that's what he was going to do. Try everything before picking the one job he wanted. And he already had the hookup from his uncles, including the dead one whose name he can't remember, and the living one whose name he can't remember, so he was going to be stationed in Australia as an undesignated seaman. He had one guy that actually did believe all of this crap. Though I will say, the most common lie was about ASVAB scores. I don't get it, it's technically private, but everyone knows someone who has access to that info to easily prove or disprove someone's claims. I'd say the entire command knew the top and bottom 5 ASVABs at any given time without them being appropriately shifted as people moved in and out of the command. You can't lie about something that everyone knows. Yep, when I was in high school my sophomore year, this girl wrapped an ace bandage around her chest and colored on it with a red Sharpie and said that she had been shanked by MS-13. I used to work on cruise ships, and there was this stand-up comedian who was an insane liar. He told us all kinds of bullcrap about how he was once the voice of Donald Duck, But he got fired for doing an impression of Donald, climaxing that ended up going viral on the internet. He also said he'd been on Letterman. He hadn't, maybe in the audience, but never on the actual show. The best lie he told me was when we were in the crew bar. My hometown had just gotten their NHL team back, so I was proudly rocking a new Winnipeg Jets hat. He proceeded to tell me that he played for the original Winnipeg Jets in the 90s. I was like, which I lived and breathed the Jets in the 90s and I never saw your butt on any of our teams. He then goes on to say that he was originally a soccer player at St. Louis and he got drafted by the Blues when the GM was at one of his games. This, he says, was right around the time the Blues team was formed, in the 1980s. The frickin' Blues have been in the NHL since 1967. He was dead frickin' serious when he told me all of this. I just sat there in shock wondering how the frick he could possibly think I'd believe any of it. Then a few days later he was busted in his cabin with a crap ton of white snow. So I guess I got my answer. There was a girl in middle school that would just lie about being rich. The only ones I specifically remember was that she only gave her cat Evian water and said that her dad was a doctor and drove a Porsche. I didn't care either way. But one day after school I paid attention to what car she got into. I can still see her panicked face as she realized I was watching her get into a rinky-dink Toyota Corolla. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.